Welcome to the Recovering Mercury from Tailings session. My name is Shenping Chow. I've been a geologist and mining engineer for 10 years before joining the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency about 20 years ago. In 2018, I started working with the U.S. Department of State's Mercury program. Currently, I am shared between the EPA and Department of State, and the majority of my projects are in Colombia. While we and so many of you here are making every effort to promote mercury-free mining, we are still facing the problem of tailings, often containing mercury generated from many years of mining activities in the past. In Colombia, some dated back to the days of the Spanish conquistadores. On the average, about 18 metric tons of tailings are generated to produce one gold ring. This is just an average, and not all productions involve the use of mercury. Recent figures show that Colombia produced between 50 to 60 metric tons of gold per year. Almost half of that is from ASGM, and most of them with no tailings management plans. And in that setting, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Alfonso Rodriguez. Alfonso is a chemical engineer with a master's degree in soils and environmental pollution from the University of Reading in the UK. He has completed postgraduate courses in industrial hygiene and is certified in occupational health and safety by both the US and UK governing bodies. Currently, he is the Global Mercury Strategy Director and Country Director in Colombia for Pure Earth, an NGO in the United States. Welcome, Alfonso.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much, Pim, for this introduction. Okay, thank you. I will do a presentation about one project we are running from 2018, more or less. And this project is try to recover mercury from artisanal tailings in Colombia specifically. This project is a synergy initially funded by the Department of State of the United States, and then also funding by the planetGOLD through UNDP Colombian office. And we can, this is an example of how different donors and can support the improvement of one mission, in this case, to recover mercury. Next slide, please. The whole project have three principal pillars. The first one is try to identify recovery mercury technologies. We did a big workshop, technical workshop in Colombia in 2019, try to compile all the most efficient techniques. Then we identify one of them that we will present, that is the copper plates. And with this development, we try to do a model, try to put this in field with the miners and try to implement in a low cost. And then also, after all this process, we get mercury. And one of the pillars, or the final pillars of the project, is try to find or figure out the process how to handle this mercury in transport, storage, and disposal way. That is a need, for example, in Colombia and other South American countries as well. Next slide, please. You can see some pictures how you can find these tailings in Colombia. Most of them coming from rock mining, other coming from alluvial mining, especially in Choco area. But at the end, we can find piles of tailings. In other part of the country, we can find sacks with a lot of amount of tailings as well. And finally, we found also illegal and no structure tailing ponds or pool where the miners put all the process of the tailings inside. This is I think it's a global problem. It's not from Colombia, because there is some aspect that I want to point or highlight because it's very important to understand why we are trying to work in this. First, this is coming from the illegal mining, more of them. Most in Colombia, that the use of mercury in mining activities is banned from 2018. So we can find abandoned tailings from many years, and other than recently coming from illegal mining. That's a problem. The other is there is a high level of concentration of mercury inside this tailing, and also there is a high level of gold inside of these tailings as well. And this produces that this tailings is very interesting for others mining, reprocessing this tailings to get this gold out and get money for that. Um, that's create an underground market of tailings between miners that is not very useful for us because the transportation of move the tailings is moving the contamination of mercury from one side to other side. So this is one of the problems that we need to or we want to solve as well. And also, all these create different concepts between the Ministry of Mining and Ministry of Environment, because in one hand could be uh, taking the tailings as a hazardous waste, but on the other hand also could be a mining material to reprocess. So that's some dilemma that we need to also deal with in this project, and we are trying to get the best way how to get an answer of this one. Next slide, please. To start this process, we need to do a characterization of the tailing. And the tailing, most of them, we do two kind of characterization. One is a chemical characterization. You need to know the level concentration of mercury, gold, and other metals as well, as a lead, arsenic, and iron as well. And also a mineralogical characterization is useful to understand how the miners can use the tailings to reprocess in an efficient way in a mercury-free technique in the future. So both characterizations are very important. In field, we use the XRF to determine some levels. We take samples and send to the lab as well. And for also check if there is any mercury concentration in the air, we use the Hermet device and the Jerome device to see how is the concentration of this one. Next slide, please. So at the moment, you can see on the picture the map of Colombia. In the current map that you see is only 4 departments, mining departments, where we identified at least 38 tailings with high concentration of mercury. But for the last part of the last year and this year, we complete 140 tailings, different tailings in other 7 departments. So we get more information how this is concentration in all part of the country. We have a global map, and we can decide where can put this technology to recover mercury. Next slide, please. And also, you can see what is the concentration of gold inside these tailings. So this is very interesting, I mentioned before, because it's a new market, it's a new option for small miners to get more, how to say, income money from this process. So we have all the aspect for both concentration mercury at gold. Next slide, please. Okay. After our technical workshop that we did in 2019, we identified at least 8 different technologies that we can use maybe to recover mercury. But one of the most efficient and more feasible to implement was the copper plates. This technology was presented by Marcelo Vega. He is our technical support in this project. And the original idea coming from one company in Brazil. And we are trying to adapt this technology for now in Colombia, but the idea is to adapt this technology in other countries as well. We use copper plates, but the real action for the chemical capture of mercury is not the copper, it's the silver. So we need to do a electrolysis process in order to achieve the silver coating in the surface of the copper. The copper is only a medium, and we are trying to change the medium as well. So you can see we use a small plates, 30 centimeters of each plate, 3 millimeters of thick. And we create also groove. This is very important to very much group we have, more efficiency, we can increase the recovery of mercury. Uh, and we are improving this technology through these 3 years of project. So next slide. You can see here how we start. We start in 2019 in a lab test with a small, only 3 or 4 plates. Then we changed a field test, phase 1, in 2020, and we used more 6 plates, and was the first pilot test that we did on field. And we get very good results. I will show you later. And then we improve the prototype, and the prototype was using at the end of 2020 with more plates, and the configuration is different. And finally, between 2021 and 2022, we improve another kind of module, like a tunnel, try to put more plates in the process and try to increase the mercury on the plate. And you can see at the end of the process how the plate is covered with mercury, elemental mercury. So we take out this mercury from the tailings on the process. Next slide, please. Okay, I will show you very briefly each of the tests that we did. At the beginning, we get only 4 plates, and the results with this tailings water recovery of 79% of reductions, with some problems and some limitations, with a small amount of tailings that we use in that lab experiment, was only to see how the technology works. Next slide, please. For the phase 1 in field, we use more different tailings. The amount tailings was 6 ton tailings that we use. We use 3 different types of tailings of age. One recently, the other is more 5 years ago tailings. We process all of them, and we get up 83% of reduction of one of the tailings that was recently was created recently. It means that if the mercury keep in few months, it's very easy to extract. But if the mercury keep during the years, maybe it's more difficult to extract with the technology. It's something that we can or could identify at the moment with this pilot test. Next slide, please. For the phase 2, we changed the prototype. You see, the prototype is different. We increased the surface of contact between the tailings and the plane. And also, you can see, was the first time that we can collect liquid mercury from this pilot test, because one of the tailings was very recently, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago, and we can take this tailing and process them. So the concentration that we recovered was until 70%. Next slide, please. And the third phase was different. We changed the prototype. We add more copper plates, 30 copper plates we increase. We use three different types of tailings, and the average was 8 tons. The whole process is more than 100 tons that we process in all these phases. And we call it, the reduction was different. In this pilot test, we get only 50% of recovery mercury from the tailings. Something that I want to add here is that all these experiments or these pilot tests was only one pass of tailings over through the copper plates. Because there is a limitation with the miner. He needs to process the tailings very quick in order to get money. So we only have the chance to get one pass through the plates once. The idea is to increase the number of passes in the future. And then with planetGOLD and UNDP, next slide, please. We try to combine all this process in different aspects and try to find different schemes. So put one prototype, two prototypes, use another machines, check and table, also a concentrate, and also a milling, and try to combine all the process in one. With this project, we are able to define an economic model for the miner to implement this copper plates technology on field. This is very low cost in comparison with other technologies. So next slide, please. You will see a short video how these tailings go through the copper plates. You can see first how go to the checking table, then go through one prototype that use two copper plates, and then go through the tunnel with 30 copper plates. So you can put the video, please. Okay, in this part of the process, we process 7 tons of tailings only one pass. So at the end of the process, you can see how the copper plates through the tunnel is affected with the mercury, and how we collect the mercury at the end of the process. So at the beginning is high concentration of mercury, reduced, and at the end of the tunnel, we receive another high concentration of mercury at the end of the process. With this process, we get more. Next slide, please. Is near to 80% of recovered mercury with hot process. And with only one pass and this high concentration of recovery mercury, I think it's a good efficiency. And the idea is to keep working in this and improve the technology to increase the recovery mercury at the end of the process. Next slide, please. Some conclusion for this work that we are doing. First, always we get recovered mercury when the tailings go through the copper plates, and we increase the concentration of recovery when the tailings is go to the checking table, because they divide the high concentration of mercury in one current, and the other we can process in the same time. So that's that we could identify. The mineralogical distribution of the tailings is very important for the next process to recovery gold in the future, but no is affecting the recovery mercury in the process at all. And also something that we are trying to figure out as well is how determine the lifetime of the plate. At the moment, we use for, I think, 3, 4 different tailings, and we take these plates as a hazardous waste under the current regulation in Colombia. We can dispose these waste with mercury on that field. So this is one of the process. The other idea and the future is try to put this how to say, copper plates in other process to try to recover mercury for maybe something that need mercury in the future, but it's not the real idea. It's more to disposal in a good way at the end of the process. And finally, the age of the tailing also affect the process. I mentioned before, if we have very new tailings, it's very easy to get the mercury out. If the tailings go years on the environment, it will more difficult. The oxidation of the plate is more, and the mercury, the mercury go evaporate, so it's different. So some key points before finish my presentation. The idea of this process is to take out the mercury from the environment that is spread on the environment and put in a small centimeters. So we are collecting the mercury and we are protecting the environment and we are protecting the exposure of people that is near to this tailing as well. And some issue that we try to do in the future is try to change the material, try to prove another materials in order to change the copper or keep using copper as a medium to get silver and capture mercury. And also the idea to increase the mercury concentration is to create a closed circle process, a recirculated tailings many times in order to get more mercury on the copper plates. And that's all my presentation. The idea is to promote this kind of technology in other part of the country, in other countries as well. It's a low-cost implementation. We are not selling any technology. We are only support technically the miners how to by themselves can buy the materials, can be implemented, and also how they can do something for the environment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alfonso. I noticed we have some questions, but if Ali and Yves Kong and Felix could be a little bit patient, we'll wait for the questions at the end of everyone. So since Alfonso mentioned some of the non-technical challenges, i.e., for example, the ownership of the tailings, and after we recover the gold, because depends on where the tailings coming from, whether it's an underground market, is that a legal way to market the gold that we recovered? So with that, we're going to introduce our second speaker, Silvia Maria Mendez Parodi. Silvia is an environmental engineer, environmental law attorney, who is a consultant to Pure Earth on legal issues related to tailings. She has a master's degree in international environmental law and international business law from the American University Washington College and a specialization in corporate social responsibility from the Universidad de Castilla-La Mancha. Currently, she's the director of Civitas Foundation, as well as the director in environmental areas of the law firm Muñoz Tamayo y Asociados. In addition, she's also a law professor at the Universidad Javeriana. Welcome, Silvia.
Thank you, Ping. Buenos días a todos.
Everyone, we're going to talk about the challenges of the Colombian state concerning tailings on artisanal mining. The next slide. Now, this is a specificity from Colombia, but this is a topic that can be seen in many other countries because we are revising how to recover mercury, how to dispose it and how to define the management of mining tailings and residues that are produced from mercury or from the gold that's recovered based on mining activities, and many of these are considered as informal or illegal. In Colombia, we have a general framework that talks about private property, but it also talks about a healthy environment and the handling of natural resources, where the main interest is to prevent and, of course, to avoid environmental deterioration, and we find amongst these mercury contamination. As I had said this by Alfonso, we have a legislation that was issued in 2013. It was established to eradicate the use of mercury in all industrial and productive procedures in a period not greater than 10 years. In other words, this takes place the following year. And for mining, it was established that the removal of mercury would take place completely in 5 years. This took place in 2018. However, many miners continue utilizing mercury, especially those miners that need to survive or that are defined as artisanal miners. So therefore, Minimata gives us the definition of artisanal mining and small scale, and the agreement established in the reasons that for Colombia, this would be represented as subsistence and small mining. Traditionally, it's been understood that artisanal mining should be that does not utilize machinery in the production of gold. Next slide, please. Now, the definition of artisanal mining was based on a decree issued in 2016, and as I had said, legally it was understood as what we call subsistence mining, utilized by manual tools without the use of machinery. However, it's been established, and based on a study of Los Andes back in 2020, we try to prevent that all artisanal mining is cataloged as illegal mining, because small miners have been stigmatized because, they depends on the machinery and tools, but they're small miners, and this has justified many military and law enforcement activities. Now, with regards to the main issue concerning artisanal mining, we are facing a scenario which is not completely legal. Therefore, the illegal exploitation of minerals, gold especially, is one of the most challenging issues for the southern countries. It has high social and environmental impacts. The majority of artisanal mining take place informally, and this, of course, implies that the labor from these activities do not have any health help, and this might generate much impact. Social impact concerns, because the magnitude of impacts from a social and environmental perspective generate in the Colombian state the need to be able to go to these locations to solve these issues of illegal mining, but at the same time, they're removing subsistence possibilities to these people that traditionally have been mining gold. The environmental impacts are enormous because basically mercury is used in these activities, and this generates, amongst other impacts in water, natural water resources, deviations occur, deforestry, morphological issues, and clearly contamination of water sources for the use of mercury.
In this sense, we've been working in a project to establish how we can remove mercury beyond technicalities in the legal scope, because we have a setting that is not clear, as I told you, and at the end of the day we can harm small miners who are considered to be informal, but they use mining as a livelihood. Here we are facing the need of covering different ways in which we are mining gold and how we can manage these tailings. So we are analyzing which entities should intervene, if it's local authorities, national authorities, how we differentiate in artisanal mining, illegal mining, if it's in fact illegal or not. In Colombia, we have a huge problem with criminal mining that is defined because it finances armed groups. This is a big issue, and we try to differentiate which is artisanal mining from which isn't, to manage these tailings that end up being abandoned. So what's the procedure for the intervention of these abandoned tailings? And in any case, the premise on which we work is that the state should have all the administrative tools to take possession of those tailings with mercury and manage them. So here we have this question, if any tailing with mercury should be considered as an environmental liability. There's a discussion between the environment and mining, because most of tailings contain traces of mercury, as Alfonso showed in the previous presentation. Tailings still have gold. So for the mining portfolio, the tailing could be considered as a mining material, whereas for the environmental portfolio, it's an environmental liability because it has residues of mercury. So it is necessary for us to work jointly, bearing in mind this situation. And on the other hand, it is very important to have technical mechanisms to geolocate all the tailings that have mercury. We have a clear path to manage tailings. We have to evaluate the presence of mercury in the tailing, and then, as Alfonso said, we should have the necessary technology. We have to transport tailings. Most of these tailings, when they come from mining, whether it is artisanal or illegal or informal, they are abandoned and no one manages them, and we have to transport them to a collection center and then separate the materials with the best technology available. And then we have to make the final the final elimination, and we have to do what we do with tailings that has gold, who this gold belongs to, because their origin is not legal at all, and we face a problem because we need to know the origin of that gold to then market it. As I was telling you, who should leverage these tailings or manage these tailings? Well, the question that we're trying to answer, if this should be done by the state directly or through direct hiring processes, or by the private sector through public biddings. So it is clear that the tailing that is abandoned or the tailing that comes from illegal mining is the responsibility of the state, and the state now is facing a problem of hundreds of abandoned tailings contaminated with mercury that are producing environmental degradation, contamination of water sources, and they are left behind because there's a legal loophole, or because the regulations are not enforced to leverage this tailings, separate mercury from gold, and dispose of mercury properly. Right now, we have a legal loophole because we do not have clear legislation about environmental liabilities. We think that tailing is an environmental liability. We don't have the necessary standards to tell us how we can manage this tailing if it's considered as a liability. And if we consider it as a liability, we can make an analysis if the tailing contains or not gold. And this would facilitate its management. In case it has gold, there's a new problem to leverage this as a mining material and work with the authorities and how we can manage this tailing to commercialize gold or to finance mercury, as we will see in the next slide. In this sense, we have to define a financial mechanism for the disposal of non-usable tailings with mercury because they are an environmental liability, and also those liabilities or those tailings that in fact have gold that can be used, how we can improve the practices by means of the gold that is being mined. So we've thought about funds, for instance, where that gold funds better environmental practices for artisanal miners, and also that we can finance the final disposal of mercury that is captured, because we still do not have in Colombia the necessary infrastructure to properly dispose of mercury as the final residue, and not even if it's disposal that should be made by the state. This is a discussion, and we are facing a huge problem in Colombia because illegal mining is a big percentage of the economic activity of many people, but also we have illegal or criminal mining that produces a huge environmental impact, and it's necessary to address because we're allowing the contamination with mercury in many water sources that are affecting us. And we have several studies that show that they are affecting entire populations. This is all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sophia. And we have about 5 or 6 questions for Alfonso. Some of those are a little bit the same, and I'll try to combine them in light of the time. And also apologize in advance if I don't pronounce somebody's name correctly. So the first question is from Ali Ng Diarra. And how do you find mercury in the soil and water? I'm not sure
Okay.
if using the instrument or...
Okay, I will try to answer that question. We identified mercury with the measure of XRF in soils and tailings and sediments as well. One of the issues is that the humidity of the sample affect the measure of the equipment, and so to be sure what is the level concentration, we send part of the samples to a lab, and that is in water. We usually not um, do some tests for this experiment, no? But obviously it should be mercury in water.
Okay, and the second question is from Yves Bertrand, and it's actually a two-part question, but Jane Dennison also asked a similar question that since you have experience working with the miners in Colombia, and how do they look at how do they feel about this method you use, and are they interested in using it? And Eve asked a similar question: how do we give economic incentives to the miners to reprocess the tailings?
Oh, this is very interesting question. The first one is why are doing we are doing this is because the idea to get the gold that is inside the tennis, one of the methodologies is the cyanidation process. But if the mercury is present, the cyanide with the mercury is the most toxic compound on the environment. One thing, and under Minamata Convention, we can process the cyanidation process, but without mercury. And the idea is to remove the mercury as much we can before this process. That's one of the principal ideas in why we are doing this. We will not get the 100% removed mercury, but we are trying to do new tests to precipitation of mercury after cyanidation process, but that's another issue in the future. With this process, and to show to the miners in the real time and real life how it works, they are very interesting. They are able to invest to get that because they help to get a formalization process more easily. Because if they implement, okay, we are recovering mercury, we are doing the sanation process, and we are disposing in a good way the tailings, it's very they get points to get a formalization process more easily through the government. So that's the principal incentive for the miners, and they are happy to implement this technology as much they can. That's the idea.
And the second part from Eve's question is, have you tried to use a combination of gravimetric separation? It seems that most gold catching equipment can also do a good job of capturing mercury because it has a interesting density contrast.
Yes, and the answer is yes. We did with uh, the second part of the project with the UNDP and planetGOLD. We try to combine gravimetric and physical and chemical options before they use the copper plates. And we are improving right now. We are trying to get the final results. And yes, the answer is we think that we can increase the efficiency using gravimetric methods before the copper plates.
And another question, actually, it seems like there's a general theme about disposal. What do you do from Felix Rushka, that after you get done with the silver plate, the copper plate with the silver and mercury, how do you prevent people from using those mercury plates for gold amalgamation again? And at a similar note, Rachel Ajayi asked, how do we handle the wastewater containing mercury? And again, Jane asked a similar question, what do we do with the mercury?
Okay, there is three questions in only one. That I will to answer it by part.
So that how do you dispose
First,
the plates? Yes.
hear me? Okay, so we consider these copper plates after the process as a hazardous waste. I mentioned under the current regulation in Colombia, this element could be disposal in an landfill in a proper way. So we did, and the idea is that the miner can apply for this option. This the first one. The second one is that the related with how to avoid that people use this mercury to get more gold or use the mercury in the future. It's a difficult question, depends on the country. In Colombia, it's banned, so they can't, so it's illegal. Illegal action, we are not working in illegal action. However, if we implement this technology in other countries where the use of mercury is still can be used, can be an option for them, but we don't recommend at the moment. But we can extract the mercury in a thermal process with the copper plates and also get what happened, but it's only idea in the future. And finally, how we manage the tailings at the end of the process is that in our case, we are working with a miner that is in the formalization process. So in order to get this formalization process, he should present environmental management plan to the government and build a specific tailings ponds or tailings pools to put all the tailings there. So at the end, they do some kind of stabilization of the tailings in that place.
Okay, Alfonso. Um, we have
Yes, I'm
two
here.
more. Okay, we have two more questions. One from Kenneth Davis is, are there any other possible techniques for removing mercury from tailings in addition to copper plate, such as thermal methods? And also, those processed tailings still contain residual, a small amount of mercury. And are there special precautions that must be used when you want to do, I assume, is cyanide leaching with mercury?
Okay. For the first question, yes, we did compile information of different alternative of technologies to recover mercury. we get a very good document that you can download from our website, and there is 13 different technologies to recover mercury. And the thermal process, one of the we get in one part of the project as an option. But in terms of put that technology on field, the cost is very high. Is a lot of limitation to get a thermal process in a faraway sites for the cities, and in comparison to the copper places is different. And the other part of the question was, sorry, I forget.
Okay. So how much mercury could we capture? This is actually very, there's some overlapping with the last question from Kevin Telmer, that we test the mercury in the beginning and then test the mercury at the end. And I mean, obviously we cannot capture all the mercury. And the two concerns are, the first is some of the other materials may pick up mercury.
Yeah.
And the other one is, if we're going to use cyanide gold leaching afterwards, there's still mercury left. I mean, it's a reduced amount, but there's still some left.
Yeah. Any chemical process have 100% of efficiency. So we get in some 30, 74, 81% of efficiency, and we will continue working in this to increase the efficiency. But I am sure we'll not get the 100%. So mercury will left on the tailings after the process, and we are also are working right now on how to try to cache or precipitate this mercury after the desalination process. Is other part of the project that we are working with the Department of State as well, and we expect to have some results maybe in July this year. But this how complement the reduction of mercury with the copper plates as much we can, and then the rest with the precipitation process in desalination process. That's we are working already.
Thank you, Alfonso. And let me just double check we don't have any more questions. No, but as you all see, this is just the beginning, and there's still a lot of challenges on the economic side. Some of the methods may work, but could be very expensive. On the legal side, how do we commercialize the gold that we recovered? And also on the legal side and technical side, how to store and dispose of the mercury within the Colombian legal framework and in a technological sound way. So the conclusion is there's still a lot of work to be done. This is just a beginning. And we have also a very short, about 3-minute video that is going to be posted in resources that further explain and demonstrate some of the work that Alfonso has done and is continuing to do. Unfortunately, it's only in Spanish. It does not have English subtitle or anything. But I encourage anyone who's interested to learn more to take a look at that video. And thank you very much, Alfonso, and thank you, Sylvia. We still got about 1 minute. If anybody has a last-minute comment or question, we might be able to sneak it in.
Now, thank you so much. Thank you so much to planetGOLD, and 3 days of different talks and presentation will be very useful, and see all aspects of what is the problem with mercury in mining areas in different parts of the world. Thank you so much for everyone.
Thank you, Alfonso, and thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you, Ping. Thank you for this. Oh, there's this last question. I don't know if we have time.
Oh, yes. What changes in the regulations must be implemented to facilitate mercury recovery?
Facilitate recovery. Yeah, we have to change some regulation regarding the commercialization of the gold, mainly because if we do recover mercury from the tailings, we can dispose of the mercury because we have already a legislation that allows that. However, we do not know what to do with the gold because we would have to have a certificate of origin, and that certificate of origin has to have a legal background. In these cases, some of the tailings don't have a legal title or don't have a certificate of origin. So we do need to change legislation to allow for the recovery of the mercury and see what we can do with that gold. For now, it would only be a matter of recovering the mercury and dispose it, but then we would have gold that we would have to see what to do with it.
Thank you. Oh, there's one more question, but I think we'll have to answer it later on the Planet Go website. We don't want to take up the next group's time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you are hearing me. Welcome to this session titled Gender Impacts Under Assessments, Lessons from South America. Today, we will share experiences and lessons learned as for the gender approach applied for planetGOLD projects in Bolivia, Ecuador, and Guyana as an answer to all the problems affecting women linked to mining sector. So we are aware that historically this is a man-dominated sector. That is why it's so urgent to deploy solutions answering to the needs of people with greater vulnerability. And for this, it is necessary to potentialize gender equality as a basis to face the economic and climate crisis. To begin, we invited Ana Maria Aranibar, who will talk about gender analysis in ASGM. She is the director of Cumbre de Sajama, linked to the mining sector for over 35 years, and she has had the opportunity to potentialize gender equality and sustainable development. Ana Maria, you have the floor. Good morning, and thank you very much for allowing me to share the Bolivian experience regarding gender in ASGM. Right now, let me present you with a summary of the activities that led us to a gender action plan to ASGM regarding the Gold Plus program. At first, we collected information, primary and secondary information, and I would like to state that in Bolivia, usually women are split into working groups. Women under traditional mining, and these are mining from industrial complex, tin, platinum, lead, and women from the gold sector. We have focused our attention working in the gold sector, and it is here where we have two large working groups. In one you have women working as associate from mining cooperatives, and the other group, they work as independent workers, and they are called Barranquilleras in La Paz department. and also bateadoras. They are from the eastern part of Bolivia. This group has grown in recent years, so there is a strong percentage of women, and this has been one of the findings of this project. For our activity, we decided to focus our attention on these two groups from the gold sector, and we worked on the secondary information with questionnaires, on in-person workshops and interviews of key persons, leaders that we selected. So our survey let us know how much they are using Mercury. And also, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we developed this format through Zoom, and we decided to gather information for Madre de Dios and San Ramon, and it was done by Zoom because of the lockdown policies. And I think this experience was really hard for us because we were not able to go there and work on the site, and this is what we have expected. So we managed to visit La Paz department, which is a very large sector with women. We worked in Tipuani, Chima, Chuquini, Huanay, and Teoponte. These are the locations with a higher concentrations of Barranquilleras and Barranquilleros, men as well. So we developed the Gender Action Plan from the planetGOLD program. Next, please. The approach for this analysis was quantitative and qualitative. We focus on the participation. What do women want? How do women feel? And for this plan, we were able to identify 4 or 5 items that send alerts to us, because on one side we have invisible work for women in the gold sector. On the other side, the use of mercury without safe conditions for them and their families, lack of recognition to their economic contribution, lack of leadership because of cultural and social matters, which are characteristic of Bolivian mining sector, and the lack of public policies in favor of women. This diagnosis was placed in the 4 components that Gold Plus has. The first one, which is optimize ASGM strategies with comprehensive approach. It pinpoints the need to promote empowerment of women, to help them promote visibility and advocacy of the labor and social rights. The second component, financial inclusion and the creation of responsible supply chains. We think that there is a need to contribute with greater balance of economic relationships between men and women from ASGM that will lead to access possibilities to financial sources for women. This is impossible right now, mainly for women in this sector. Component 3, which is about adoption of new technologies to eliminate the use of mercury. This is a key component. there is the need to potentialize women knowledge on the better techniques and technologies to recover gold, gradually eliminating the use of mercury. And they will become change promoters towards a better health conditions and better economic benefits in gold mining. Next, please. And finally, component 4, which is about promotion of exchange of knowledge, lessons learned, and development of local capabilities. We need to improve the management capabilities of women through the creation of organizations from the local towards the national level in order to achieve more representation. We decided that if we work with working alliances and networks, will lead us to a success regarding the effect of public policy in favor of women before state institutions. We are right now in this process with a mentorship program of leader mining women from ASGM, supported by the support program from this sector, from planetGOLD. We feel that from this end, we will have a better approach from civil society towards the interest of women. In Bolivia, there are so many women working in ASGM, and this is necessary to take into consideration. And these are some pictures just to remind you how women are panning gold chips in one day or 1 week, and the burnt practice of gold that sometimes is done at the house's kitchen, neglecting the effect it has on health. This is because of lack of knowledge, and these all represent greater challenges to face. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you, Ana Maria, for your presentation. Clearly, it's really important to have this information of gender analysis. We are gathering all the questions posted here by the audience, and at the end of this session, we will have a dedicated time to Q&A. Now, we welcome 2 women leaders that will talk about training of goldsmith women. Carla Alvarado, she is president of the Goldsmith Association from the province El Oro from Ecuador, and they are creating a shift in their territory. And also we will have the participation of Verónica Salomón, co-founder of Marcalia Sustainable Jewelry with neutral carbon in circular mining. So please, Carla, you have the floor. Good morning, everybody. I am Carla Alvarado, born and raised in Portobelo at the south of Ecuador. Portobelo is a community where culture and history are linked to mining. And gender stereotype had defined the conditions of the community. 8 years ago, were not women involved in the production process of gold. And in fact, you don't see many of them participating. Men dominate the mining activity in this region. In 2019, there were some benefits for this region, and we decided to create jewelry that is abundant everywhere you looked. In Portobello, there were 3 or 4 goldsmiths, all men, no women, because they said that women do not have the physical strength and the skill to do this. This idea grew stronger because women heard it. They are wives or couples of men from these facilities. So with the support from government programs, we developed a goldsmith workshop and we learned the skill to work the gold. We created an association. At first, mostly men were members of it, but little by little, women become members. We make this initiative our own. One of the greatest challenges we had is that first, we needed to believe in this initiative because many people were saying that we were not able to do so. Why we wanted to do so, and as the project advanced, we were able to prove that women, with our imagination, our skills, are able to create products that can become part of our livelihood and contribute to our economies. Local people were convinced that if we are able to achieve this, we will see this as something positive for our city. The second challenge was to break gender stereotypes and involve more women, because we heard that goldsmiths were only men because physical strength is needed. Knowledge about this mineral is needed, but we decided to show that women can. Currently, we are 12 women associates. We are studying this because we have learned about minerals, about jewelry, and we have created the association. We have the workshop. It was installed with equipment and tools, and we are creative and we have a talent for the creation. This initiative has been very important for us as women because we live in a mining sector where opportunities are not the same for men and women. Jobs are not easy to find for women. Never before had we had the initiative to create jewelry. And Portobello has been always dedicated to gold extraction. We create and sell mercury-free jewelry. This is not only about believing in ourselves and our skills, but also we contribute economically to our families. Some associates come from other cities as Machala, Cerumo, Piñas, and they are creating an income for themselves. And some associates sell our jewelry to family members here or abroad. Here we are nurturing our dreams, and now we want to create an institution to learn and to teach these skills. We want to give back to our society, free from gender stereotypes, where people will enjoy equality of rights and opportunities. We want to add young people and adults so they will enjoy of this job creation, so they will discover and develop this skill. And next, I would like to show a video presenting some of our colleagues and our workshop. Please play the video. We have learned to make rings of various models, to cut charms in with several techniques, and we are also producing bracelets and chains. We have this precious material, so why not have a finished jewel? So that can also give a nudge to these women to get ahead, to create new opportunities, to be successful, to see beyond, and not only sell in Portobello, but also across the nation, and who knows, maybe export our products. In this beautiful adventure of our project, we have met people that have helped us to grow, and they are our role models. I would like to ask Veronica Salomon, who has supported us in our association to improve our knowledge as techniques and finishes in the metal. Carla Martalia, we are honored to be a part of your story because certainly women can do it. My mother was a member of this sector, and just like her, I want to break paradigms, mainly in an activity that historically was only for men. I learned from her that the difference is the opportunity to train, and as women, usually we are in a disadvantage. Usually, men have passed on to their sons this skill, and girls learn about domestic tasks. So now we are changing this.
We are promoting an equality world where everyone has access to opportunities. It's great to see the equality that is in the team. Today, with 12 years in the world of design of jewelry, I know that men and women have the capacity and the skill of adding value to the mineral. Ecuador is starting in this. We are a country that historically have extracted minerals, but they don't know us as creators of jewelries. Jewelry are the belief of a feeling, because no one gives a jewelry to someone that doesn't appreciate. That is why in Natalia we support the association to work together, and we will support in the design of jewelry and the design of the brand. The two issues are very important for the growth of the business. It is to create an identity, an own identity of a brand, to have their essence and to be transcendent on time, and to ensure that the products are profitable. Carla and Veronica, thank you so much for telling us all of this experience, that it's amazing and gratifying the impacts that this activity has created as a means of life, alternative means of life. It's great to share and to replicate in other countries. Now we will continue with Cassia Watson from the planetGOLD project in Guyana. She will tell us about the baseline of gender for the mapping in Guyana. Cassia is a coordinator for safeguarding for the Project Gold in Guyana that is being executed by international conservation in that country. She has been leading the transversalization of equality in the world and participation of stakeholders for more than 3 years. Welcome, Cassia.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. As Diana said, my name is Kezia Watson, and I am working with the planetGOLD Guyana project. My presentation today is an overview of how the project team began conducting our gender assessment, what we found, and how this has impacted the project's implementation and approach. Next slide. This is really just a brief overview of our project. You'll see the full project name on the left-hand side. And really, we have been working in 3 of the 10 regions that you can see on the map on the right. The project's objective is to assist Guyana with converting to mercury-free mining by 2025. And doing this by directly involving business enterprises with a profit motive in leading the shift in the development of a mercury-free ASGM supply chain and downstream Eldorado gold brand jewelry. Next slide. Why did we conduct a gender assessment? Despite the fact that it was required by the donors, a big factor is that limited information was available. You know, as the project was being designed, we as a project team really recognized the importance of looking at mining from a gender perspective. But, you know, very little was known or documented. You know, even at the start, we didn't even have an approximate percentage of, you know, the miners that are women, or even what their roles typically are. Subsequently, the Ministry of Natural Resources, they conducted a socioeconomic and gender assessment for the Minamata National Action Plan, and they estimated that in Guyana, 20% of the gold miners are women. Next slide. So the scope of our analysis was really to identify what the gender roles are in Guyana's gold value chain, and also to identify what the constraints and opportunities for participation, livelihood options, and income generation. And persons we interviewed were both men and women, not just from the gold mining community, but also indigenous villages and local communities. Next slide, please. So the methodology. So the analysis was based on both qualitative and quantitative information, and we got them from both primary and secondary resources. So the analysis was done over 3 regions, and we use key informant interviews, focus groups, individual surveys with men and women related to gold mining. We also did individual interviews with women miners, and we also had discussions with other mining stakeholders. We also collected observational data that is from the field staff, from the project sites, and of course, there was a desk review of both secondary and published information. Next slide, please. What did we find? So we found that men dominate across all stages of the gold value chain, and that women, they tended to be more engaged in support services and marketing. Some of the roles, particularly that we found, is that it was more likely that you would find a woman acting as a cook in a mining camp, or being a part of providing services to the miners or the mining camps, for example, like goods or foods. It was very rare to find actual women laborers in the mining camps, and even rarer, if that's the word, to find them in the gold processing, that is the burning off of the mercury. But you definitely find them further out in this stage with the marketing and consumers. I would really like to note that we found women in many notable mining-related government agencies and departments, and they also functioned in leadership positions. Next slide. So some of the challenges that we found through this analysis. So many of the policies are gender blind. If you can just go to the next slide. So here is an example. This is a mining permit for medium scale operations here in Guyana. It's from the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, which is the regulatory body for the government for mining, not just gold mining, but all aspects of mining in Guyana. And only in 2018, a gender box was added to the mining application. Could you go back to the previous slide, please? So other than gender blind policies, we found other challenges such as barriers to finance, particularly for women, exploitation and safety, particularly women and women within the gold mining sector in particular, are at high risk for gender-based violence and trafficking in persons. Women were also limited due to many males within the mining sector having that traditional perception of what women's roles were. Women also found it was very difficult to move forward in the gold mining sector, and in order for them to do that, they needed to have support from a known and respected male miner or from other women miners, and also information on Mercury alternatives and gold mining in general has always been geared towards men. Next slide, please. Next slide. So how is it that we have been able to use this information to shape and implement our project activities? So first and foremost, it's really about involving the women more. So for example, we have 2 demonstration sites, and we're happy to say that one is actually owned by a woman. We also have the Guyana Women Miners Organization, or GWMO. They're on our project steering committee. This group really shows that women are indeed present in the gold mining sector, and they have, I think, over 300 members that are both men and women. One of the things I particularly like is that we have been documenting women miner stories. We've been doing that through a video series called Women in Mining. So basically these videos will be shared with the Guyanese public so that they can put a face to a woman miner, and also they can hear what their journeys have been and really connect with them. We have also, for our trainings, insisted that, suitable conditions were available, not just for men's participation, but women's participation as well. We have been trying our best to tailor communications both to men and women, and we've also been adding youths as well. And of course, insisting that our consultancies not just consider gender, but actually have it a part of their work plans. Next slide. So I just wanted to add some further recommendations that our analysis showed. And these recommendations are specifically for the gold mining sector in Guyana. So firstly, that the sector ensures that the shift to the mercury-free technology, it does not disproportionately affect vulnerable women. We have found that there are some artisanal women miners who we call locally port knockers, and they may be affected by this mercury-free technology. And I feel more research can be done by the government and the sector to see what can be done in that area. Also, that in designing of financial mechanisms that, it's not just easily accessible to males, but also to female miners. And in the same way that, gender sensitive policies, projects, legislation, that, they provide equal access to men and women for land and for licenses. We realize that it's very much leaned towards males compared to females. We also suggest that, more support is given for women's cooperatives at not just the district, but also the community levels. And in general, just to encourage the Guyanese gold market to be more aware that it's not just males in the sector, but females as well. And that's it for my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cassia, for sharing your experience from Guyana. Now we want to open the space for questions and answers. We have received a few comments, so let me share them with you. The first one is anonymous. It says, the spirit and vibrations of this session are amazing. One question for Carla and Veronica. If you could find yourselves 10 years or 20 years ago, what would you say to yourself, and what are the challenging things that you have to face as mining women and Feber women in this industry? Do you think women have advantages that have to take advantage of more? We want to listen to Carla and Veronica. Please go ahead, Carla, then Veronica, I will continue. Well, I will continue. So what I would tell myself 10 or 20 years ago is that the silence will never be a solution, that if we want things to happen, we have to talk and we have to learn how to communicate and to say what we want. And the advantages are one of the things that I see is that we have to work together in the goldsmith area. And we are women that are integrated. We support each other to arise, and that is an advantage that we have. That we have to continue united and support each other every day. Great. Thank you, Veronica. Carla, we can hear you. So my advice would be that not to give up, continue. And as hard as it is, as hard or that it continues, please go ahead, because what you will see in 10 years, it will surprise you. Because something that started as an idea in a piece of paper to be transformed in a workshop, in a reality that today we see and that we have the skill to be who we are, is something that yesterday even we were in the workshop with our peers and we said, and to see each other this way, making jewelry and saying, wow, what do you think if I'll do this design or this other design, and to see the other person and say, okay, you still like here a little bit, and you are lacking here a little other thing, so you should add it. So we support each other, and we see that this group of women and men are supporting each other, and we treat ourselves with the same equality, that there's no division of men and I am a man and I can do better than you. And no, we treat ourselves equally and we push ourselves. You are women, you can do it. And that is something, and it's a feeling, an amazing feeling of creation of our dream, and it's made reality to say to that person 10 years ago, please go ahead, you are able, continue, break those barriers that no one ever did before. You can do it. That is something that I would say to myself. Great. Thank you so much, Veronica. Carla, we have one comment of Olusola Olanini. Carla, great. To be able to have a mining and processing, responsible processing, the creation of the MAPE is important, and the added value through the value chain of the minerals is so important. I agree that women in the industry, mining industry, especially the women of the mining community, should be trained and formed in the processing and vision of value to close the gap of gender equality and to manage the means that we need. Now we have a question of Zuleika Castillos. We have seen in this event that women can be drivers of change in the mapping of gold. We would like to hear Ana Maria Anariba about the possibility to create a credit line specific for women, mining women. Thank you so much. So Ana Maria, please, we can hear you. Well, thank you so much, and welcome to Zuleika in Brazil. It reminds me of a lot of experience that we have been sharing for so many years. Greetings, Zuleika, and thank you so much for the question. Well, I believe that the greatest challenge is precisely the formalization and the program, the Planet program, that is working in its specific area, 3 to 4 on the formalization area. So I think that we have to understand and to unite to create the experiences that we have to be able to achieve in our own experience, association issues, partnership issues, to be able to get to a cooperation, to work with all of the social responsibility issues that should be included in the mining sector. And on this way, we could add those successes of having women that are formalized and women that are working adequately for the environment, and entrepreneur women. I believe that that chain is the one that we should work now. It is possible.
Thank you so much, Ana Maria, for your answer. We have a question for Cassia. So I will read it first in Spanish and then in English. The question is, I would like to ask the specific differences in communications adapted to women before men in mining.
Cassia, a nice study. I would like to ask, what are the specific differences in the tailored communications to women and men miners? We hear you, Cassia.
Hi, thank you. So, what we have been doing specifically, particularly we're doing like Mercury awareness. A lot of times other agencies will just speak on how mercury affects males. What we have done is speak specifically to women, how it affects their health system, um, their bodily functions, how it is that they may have gotten mercury, and also how it would affect their children or also unborn children as well. And another thing that we've done too, when we have been sharing on our mercury-free equipment, we have also insisted on adding uh, what it weighs, which is kind of really important for women to, if they're working with the equipment of itself, the weight of that equipment is also important. And, we also show them how it is they can use it and work with it. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Cassia, for your answer. We have more questions. Yes, there is another question for Cassia. It says, as for adding a checkbox of gender, do you think this will create a barrier for approving application for women depending on who gets to review this application? How can you guarantee that supervisors or approving persons are not biased against women?
Thank you, Cassia, for your presentation. Regarding the addition of the gender box to the application, do you think this could potentially create a barrier to approving applications submitted by women.
Hi, thank you for your question.
Project ensured that the applicant, reviewers, or approvers are not biased against women. We hear you, Cassia.
Sure. So first and foremost, I just want to let persons know that the application form that I gave you an example for is from the government. So it is through the government regulatory agency. So they actually have rules and laws as to how they go about doing their things. Um, I personally don't believe that it has caused any barriers. A lot of the women miners, to get into mining, they need to be known. And many times within the government agencies, you will find a lot more women compared to if you go into the mining communities. So it's not to say that only males are dealing with these application forms. We may also have like women just going through the application forms and inputting the information. How the project can help, um, the best way forward that what we can do, we have been working with this government agency, and we have plans in place to do like gender trainings. But outside of the process, there's kind of only so much the project can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassia.
We have another question from Lori Ferry. It is about financial mechanisms. Perhaps Ana Maria can answer that. The question is, could you provide examples of financial mechanisms that currently are not accessible either for men or women and that could be tailored so they could be more accessible to women? Ana Maria, you have the floor. Yes, please. Could you ask the question again? I was not able to hear it. Well, hello, can you hear me? Yes, we hear you, Ana Maria. Okay, so the question is about leadership positions and deciding bodies. I would like if you could repeat the question. Yes, of course I will. The question is if you can provide examples of financial mechanisms that currently are not accessible either to men or women, and how can they be tailored so they could be more accessible for women. Okay, I have the question now. I can tell you that financial mechanisms in Bolivia, both for men and women, mainly in the mining sector, are burdensome because the mining sector is a sector of higher risk, we could say that. And if we consider that working in an ASGM is even worse than working with a larger corporation, a medium-sized mining company. So to work for funding for women, it's even more critical because oftentimes they are not credit persons because they do not own the land, and this could be like a collateral, so a bank or a funding agency could provide access to credit. So evidently there is a gap, a gender gap that is huge because women in the informal sector do not have access to credit. So what is it that we need to work on the financial aspect? One of the components is to achieve that some financing agencies may identify groups of women in order to create self-organization chains at first. So amongst them, women could be responsible for their credit. This is an interesting process. It is part of what we would like to work in financial matters. Thank you, Ana Maria, for your answer. We have a final question from Orusola Olanigi that is for Casia. I will read it first in Spanish. Casia, women are better managers and they are accountable for that. If they have leadership positions in decision bodies, plus their learning and skills development across the chain will contribute to close this gender gap. What do you think about it? And now in English.
Cassia, women are better managers and are accountable. Having more women in leadership positions and decision-making bodies, in addition to education and capacity development along the mineral value chain, would go a long way in bridging a gender gap. What is your take on this?
I agree. First and foremost, um, women have been found to be better managers and better managers willing to educate themselves more and everything along those lines. So while we do have women in a lot of leadership positions, what it is that we have found is that, for example, you'd have women in government agencies, in responsible for the mining sector. However, when you go into the different mining communities or the gold mining camps, it's kind of a different leadership structure. So the men also agree that women are good with managing and writing, meaning of laws and anything dealing with paperwork. But when it comes to their equipment or how their camp is run, it's a completely different story. So the big gap really is the perceptions, the traditional gender perceptions as to, okay, women are good at, education and writing and taking care of children and managing. But when it comes to gold mining and the camp and how workers are running everything, many males don't believe that they should be in that light or sector. So it's not saying that all of the males within the sector have that sort of thinking, but it's still very difficult at this point of time to kind of really change their perception that women should be more involved and should take on greater roles than what they have at the moment. Thank you.
These are the questions so far. If you have additional questions, please post it in the chat and we will be answering and posting them in our planetGOLD website. It is important to highlight gender equality in ASGM as proven by the studies and works presented today. We hope you have enjoyed these presentations. Thank you so much for your attendance, and with this we finish this session. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day. Good day. Have a good day.
Buen día, que pasen bien, cuídense.
Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias. Hasta pronto.
Good day, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Luis Fernandez. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Amazonian Scientific Innovation at Wake Forest University. And I'd like to invite you to the planetGOLD session on ASGM impacts on forests. So we'll be discussing the latest research on mercury uptake, deforestation, and other related impacts of ASGM on forests. I'd like to, at this session, we'll be joined by two speakers, Dr. Jacqueline Gerson from the University of California at Berkeley, and Dr. Matthew Feiner from Amazon Conservation, where we'll be discussing issues related to the impacts on forests. We have a couple minutes before we start our session, so I will just start to provide a little background on myself. I am a research associate professor at Wake Forest University at the Department of Biology, and I direct CINCIA, which is an organization that focuses on scientific research related to the impacts of ASGM. And I am pleased to be invited by the organizers of the planetGOLD conference to discuss this very interesting and important topic. I did want to remind folks that after this session, there is an event that starts at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. It's a meeting hosted by the World Bank Group's Climate Smart Mining Initiative, and this event will provide an opportunity to discuss and advance the concepts and practice of forest smart mining for the artisanal and small-scale mining sector. I'll provide a reminder for everyone for that event at the end of this session, and we hope that you'll join us then. So I think we can go ahead and start the presentation. There are three speakers in this session. The first one is myself. I already provided an introduction. I'll be followed by Dr. Jacqueline Gerson, and rounding out the session will be Dr. Matt Feiner, and then we'll have a short Q&A session and be looking to end 10 minutes before the hour. Okay, so moving to the next slide, please. Just a quick description of CINCIA, or the Center for Amazonian Scientific Innovation. This is a center based in Puerto Maldonado. What we do essentially is build science capacity and develop solutions for Madre Dios using science and scientific information produced in areas affected by artisanal small-scale gold mining for better decision-making. We focus on several lines, including reforestation, restoration, and remediation of mining impacted areas. We take a look at mercury in the environment. We established the first mercury laboratory in the Peruvian Amazon. We do AI-enhanced satellite and drone analysis, imagery analysis, develop policy intelligence, and we have an education program that translates the research that we do into different parts of the education sector, including primary, secondary, and university education levels. Next slide, please. Well, to start off, I wanted to just share images. I think it's important to see the images of the places that we work in to set a context. So we've all seen these sorts of landscapes, drastically changed landscapes where forests turn into barren areas, water bodies that haven't existed before. Next slide, please. Interesting transformations that happen faster than can previously been imagined. Next slide, please. And in some cases, the scale of the transformation is quite vast. These are images from Madre de Dios in the La Pampa and the Waipetwa area. Next slide, please. Where mining occurs not only in inland areas, but on the banks of rivers. Next slide, please. And places that were formerly forests are now unrecognizable, and they look like forest pockmarked with novel wetlands. Next slide, please. So how can we characterize and start to understand the impacts of artisanal scale gold mining to forests? And so what I'm going to be presenting is basically an outline of the type of impacts, both direct and indirect, on forested landscapes, on forested ecosystems. Next slide, please. So first, we should just remind ourselves about what causes that transformation. And there's different ways to characterize this. So first would be typing it by mining technology. And roughly speaking, we can separate them into two. So one is highly mechanized placer hydraulicking, basically using bulldozers and backhoes to extract sediments from alluvial deposits, both on riverbanks and areas adjacent to rivers, and in the case of river mining, pulling it from the bottom of the rivers themselves. The next would be minimally mechanized placer hydraulicking, which is the use of suction pumps for the most part, and water cannons, monitors, to liquefy sediments and then process it using gravity separation, and then treating it with mercury afterwards. Next slide, please. We can also type it by where it's located and the ecosystems that it affects. One would be river mining, where you have small rafts using suction pumps to pull sediments from the bottom or river sides, and large dredges, which are much more production using similar technology, but just on a greater scale. And the other would be terrestrial mining, where riparian zones on the riverbanks are mined in the inland forest zones, which is the area that I'll be focusing on in this talk. Next slide, please. So we want to characterize, if we want to start to develop a characterization, we can start thinking about the direct impacts of ASGM on forests. So what I mean by that is forest areas directly experiencing mining activities. And in that category, we can break it down into deforestation, forest loss, defaunation, loss of fauna and wildlife, soil disruption and destruction, landscape transformation, and I'll discuss that specifically with a case study in La Pampa, Madre de Dios in Peru, and chemical contamination of areas affected by mining. So going through each of these, next slide, please. Deforestation, which is the total or partial loss of forest cover, including ground cover, understory, canopy, and emergent species. And this results in the loss of carbon capturing potential of forests from the loss of the above ground live carbon stocks, the trees, and a potential transformation of above ground carbon to CO2 or methane by burning, burial, or submersion and subsequent decomposition of trees and in water bodies. And in many cases, their forests are cut and thrown into the pits that then fill up with water and start to decompose. There is also, of course, a reduced potential for the natural regeneration of these forests to their previous states. So, and this has very important impacts on the recovery potential for not only natural regeneration, but human-assisted reforestation activities. Next slide, please. The velocity of this transformation can be quite fast. So it seems that the animation is not working. So this was a Planet Labs imagery of the growth of an area in La Pampa, Madre de Dios, Peru. This would have shown the advancement of that finger of deforestation towards the right side of the image. So unfortunately, this is not working, but it's quite fast, where it's moving tens of kilometers in a year, and in some cases even faster. So next, please. There's also defaunation, and that's differentiated from deforestation, a more common phrase, which is the total or partial loss of animals, the fauna, including loss at the individual, species, population, and community level. It's mainly due through the destruction of forest habitats, but it does include also direct killing of animals, including for bushmeat hunting and poaching. And it has very limited potential for the restoration of these animal populations, communities, due to the profound destruction of the habitat. Next, please. Also, soil disruption and destruction, which is essentially the target for mining. So it's profound soil disturbance in areas that are directly impacted by ASGM activity. There's excavation of the soils for up to 10 meters, which includes a physical sifting, separation, and size partitioning of soil components to extract that gold. The loss of organic soil layers, including microorganisms, the loss of soil carbon, increased erosion of soils into the waterways, which increases sedimentation in those adjacent water bodies, and a very limited potential for the natural regeneration of soils to the previous states because they're essentially mined out. So as you see in these images, very profound disturbance of these soil layers, limiting the potential as well for natural and human-assisted restoration and reforestation of these areas. Next, please. In the case of landscape transformation, this is something that we've seen specifically in many parts of lowland forest areas. Forests are dug out and converted to networks of mining ponds. So they're functionally anthropogenic, mercury-contaminated wetlands. Next slide, please. In our case study of Madre de Dios in La Pampa, 30% of the forests that have been mined have been converted to mining ponds. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Here we go. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So when we took a look using remote sensing, we found that 27.6% of forests were essentially water bodies, which means that they're not going to be reforesting anytime soon. There's no more soil. It's turned from a terrestrial habitat to an aquatic habitat. Next slide, please. We published a paper just recently in remote sensing to develop new algorithms to help with the detection of these water bodies using Sentinel-2 imagery and using deep learning, machine learning, artificial intelligence methodologies to help do this. Next slide, please. So the restoration of these potentials is virtually nil in the short or midterm. Next slide, please. And little is known of the biogeochemistry, the ecological composition, or the evolution of these areas. Next slide, please. And very little is known by the mercury-related threats to the wildlife that colonize these areas, because these now avifauna is starting to visit these areas because they're wetlands many times in flyaways for migrating birds. Next slide, please. The last up would be the contamination by heavy metals. And we've heard many presentations during the session, during this conference on mercury and ways to reduce the amount, amount and impact of mercury on landscapes. So it's not just mercury, unfortunately. Mercury is directly released from the amalgamation and is transported by water, air, redeposited soils and sediments into mining ponds, rivers, streams, and forest surfaces. But it's also the secondary release of heavy metals and tailings, which can be associated with gold, which include copper, zinc, arsenic, cadmium, and lead, mainly through those tailings. Next slide, please. And there's, in some cases, acid minus draining, which is when surface water and shallow subsurface water reacts with tailings that contain sulfur-bearing minerals, resulting in sulfuric acid leaching of iron and other metals into water and landscapes. Next slide, please. And contamination by hydrocarbons, mainly through fuels, lubricants, and production water if it's used in the mining process. Next slide, please. So for the indirect impacts of ASGM, mainly forest fragmentation, forest degradation, and contaminant transfer and redeposition. Next slide, please. So forest fragmentation, well, the patchwork of deforestation and the cutting of the forest by roads, trails, and skids creates a very highly complex pattern fragmentation in these landscapes. So it increases this forest non-forest edge, which decreases the mean size of forest patches. Next slide, please. This fragmentation is associated with increased overall forest degradation, decreased community and ecosystem level viability and resilience, and disruption of wildlife corridors. Next slide, please. In forest degradation, forests adjacent to mining areas are typically degraded by increased flooding and siltation, essentially drowning forests. And in this picture, you see basically a dead zone around these forested areas, and in some cases, they can be quite vast. These non-forest forest edge effects increases the rate of biodiversity loss and defaunation in these edge zones. There is also mechanical damage from the movement of mining operations in and out of the forest, and entry of workers into adjacent forests to collect resources such as building lumber, cooking fuel, bushmeat, etc. Next slide, please. And finally, contaminant transfer and redeposition. And in mercury and air, mercury can be released by amalgam burning, which is deposited on forest leaves and soils. And this is something that Jackie Gerson will be talking about in the next presentation. This is work that was recently published in Nature Communications and the journal Ecology. Next slide, please. Also, mercury in water, where mercury in rivers is transported by fine sediments that can travel tens or hundreds of kilometers and redeposited in downstream riparian areas. And mercury in mining ponds can be transplanted by floodwaters and redeposited in other areas. Next slide, please. And mercury in soils, where forest soils can store and bank mercury until there's future landscape disturbances such as mining, deforestation, erosion, wildfires, which releases and then remobilizes the stored mercury for redeposition someplace else. Next slide, please. So just to close this out, what questions may need answers next? I pose a couple here, and then we'll just close with some a recapping of some of these impacts. Next slide, please. So one is, will the increase of wildfires and ASGM damaged forest landscapes in the Amazon start to increase? Next slide, please. Because in the Western Amazon, this is an area projected for drying out due to climate change, and we're already seeing the increase of wildfires in the Amazon. Next slide, please. Is these increased wildfires increasing the amount of carbon and mercury releases through the revitalization of mercury that's deposited in soils and in forests, and the mobilization afterwards due to increased erosion and in some cases landslides. Next slide, please. Do ASGM impacts change? Next slide, please. With changes in mining methods. The first slide showed minimally mechanized mining, but there's a tendency to become more professionalized in a way of saying this, by the shift to moving to heavier machinery for mining in certain areas. Next slide, please. And finally, what are the impacts of social interventions on the impacts of ASGM on forests? And in the case of Peru, a large police action, Operation Mercury, shut down mining in much of Matadeos. So there's a intervention point. And of course, COVID-19, which has affected the entire ASM world. Next slide, please. So my final slide is just to go over the takeaways. So ASGM impacts on forested landscapes are high rates of deforestation, defaunation, forest fragmentation, and biodiversity loss, both in the mined areas and the areas adjacent, in the forests adjacent to mining, widespread mercury contamination of forest, water bodies, wildlife, human communities. And we should remind ourselves that mercury in water moves within watersheds, but mercury in air moves within airsheds, and they are not the same. So the envelope of mercury impacts in forested areas is much greater than is typically thought of, because it's usually considered mercury working within watersheds. Of course, soil destruction in mining areas and soil degradation in adjacent areas. And I do want to highlight that ASGM is the driver with the highest rates of soil carbon loss per hectare of any deforestation driver because of the above ground carbon and especially the below ground carbon, which I did not cover, and the loss of the carbon capturing potential of standing forests. So with that, I'll close my presentation, last slide, and thank you for your attention. So right now, I'd like to hold any questions, and we will have a Q&A session afterwards. But right now, I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, which is Dr. Jacqueline Gerson from the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Gerson is a watershed biogeochemist, investigating the impact of human activity on the cycling of elements in the environment. In particular, her research is focused on the fate and impact of mercury from artisanal small-scale gold mining in Peru and Senegal. Jackie holds a PhD in ecology from Duke University and a master's in environmental engineering science from Syracuse University, and is currently a postdoctoral scholar in environmental science, policy, and management at the University of California at Berkeley. Welcome, Jackie.
The opportunity to talk to you about my research entitled Capture of Mercury from Artisanal Gold Mining in Amazon Forests. And for this research, I'm going to bring you to the Madre Dios region of Peru, which is located in the southeastern portion of the country. The Madre Dios region contains the Amazonian forest, which has large swaths of primary old-growth forest, as well as large unchannelized rivers, such as the Madre Dios River shown here. But this landscape is being drastically altered by artisanal and small-scale gold mining. In the Peruvian Amazon alone, this involves 70,000 miners, deforesting approximately 4,500 hectares per year, in order to access approximately 80 tons of gold per year, and in the process releasing over 180 tons of mercury per year. And of course, artisanal and small-scale gold mining is not isolated to the Peruvian Amazon, but occurs throughout the world in over 70 countries. Now, central dogma to understanding mercury from artisanal and small-scale gold mining has been that mercury is of concern when it enters into aquatic environments, because aquatic environments have the low oxygen conditions that can effectively convert inorganic mercury into methylmercury, with methylmercury being the form of mercury that can bioaccumulate and is toxic to organisms. But we sought to challenge that central dogma by asking, what role do forests play in terms of capturing mercury, storing mercury, forming methylmercury, and then having mercury enter into the terrestrial food web? And this is particularly of concern in the Peruvian Amazon because some of the largest biodiversity on the planet, with the largest number of insect species found anywhere in the world, as well as it's home to many endangered species, such as the endangered giant river otter shown here, and numerous other species. And so to address this question of whether forests had a role to play in the cycling of mercury from artisanal and small-scale gold mining, we established 5 different sites in the Madre Dios region. We divided this up into remote sites and mining impacted sites. And just to show you that mining occurs throughout the region that's marked mining impacted, I'm going to zoom in on a section here and then zoom in once more. And you can clearly see that this region has thousands of ponds dotting the landscape. And so we established 5 different sites, 2 sites in the remote area and 3 sites in the mining impacted area. 2 of the sites in the mining impacted area, Boca, Colorado and Labyrinto, are located near mining towns where that mercury gold amalgam is being burnt off. These 2 sites are also young secondary growth forests. In contrast, the 3rd mining impacted site, Los Amigos, is a valuable conservation area that's occurring directly next to the mining. It has primary old growth forest, which is a similar structure to the 2 remote sites. And so gold mining drastically alters landscape cover, not just by creating these ponds across the landscape, but also by creating large swaths of deforested land, very denuded and scraggly secondary growth forests. So we established paired plots at each of these 5 different sites in a forested area as well as a nearby deforested area to see how forest structure also impacts the amount of mercury entering into the terrestrial ecosystem. The data that I'm going to show you here represent 2 years of collection across both the wet and dry season. And so understanding what happens to mercury once that mercury gold amalgam is burnt off, releasing mercury into the atmosphere, is really important to understanding where the mercury ends up and the risk that it poses to organisms. So mercury in the atmosphere can re-enter the terrestrial landscape via 3 different pathways. The first pathway is that mercury can dissolve in rainwater and then fall either to the forest floor or to a clearing in a process known as bulk precipitation. And so we began by looking at mercury concentrations in these clearings to represent mercury entering via this pathway. In this figure and in the following figures, I'm showing you mercury concentration at all 5 sites, divided into the remote sites and the mining impacted sites. And the coloring of the site names represents the forest cover types. So the 3 sites shown in green have primary old growth intact forests, while the 2 sites shown in gray have secondary growth forests. And what we saw is that all 5 sites had low concentrations of mercury entering into clearings in this bulk precipitation. There was no difference in mercury concentration across these 5 sites, and all of them had low concentrations, below what we see in the Adirondacks and the northeastern portion of the United States. And so this all suggests that this first pathway of mercury entering via bulk precipitation is not a major source of mercury to terrestrial ecosystems, and that clearings are really receiving low amounts of mercury. We then looked at the second pathway, which occurs underneath the forest canopy. In this pathway, we're looking at mercury that can stick to the surface of particles, such as dust or aerosols. These dust or aerosols are then intercepted by leaves, forming a coating on the leaves that then wash down to the forest floor when it rains in a process known as throughfall. So next we looked at whether mercury could be entering via throughfall by sticking to these particles in these forests. And what we found is that mercury concentrations were similar across 4 of the sites, but one of the sites, Los Amigos, that valuable conservation area that occurs next to the artisanal and small-scale gold mining, had elevated levels of mercury. Not only that, the concentrations of mercury that we found at Los Amigos were on par with the other highest value in the literature, from Guizhou, China, an area with mercury mining and industrial coal combustion. And when we look at the annual inputs of mercury via this pathway at Los Amigos, we find that these annual inputs are the highest ever reported around the globe from any site, suggesting enormous amounts of mercury are entering into these intact old growth forests in the Peruvian Amazon. And so there appears to be extremely high loading of mercury due both to the proximity to mining and to forest structure, whereby those intact forests at Los Amigos, which have extremely high areas of leaves, have a high surface area for mercury to be deposited onto and then enter into the terrestrial ecosystem. And so the second pathway is a really important source of mercury into these ecosystems. The third potential pathway for mercury to enter forests is via mercury being taken up into leaves themselves, which can then enter the forest floor when those leaves fall in a process known as litter fall. And when we looked at this pathway, we saw that in fact a similar pattern was true, whereby the high amounts of mercury entering into leaves at Los Amigos and the high amounts of leaves falling onto the forest floor there was leading to elevated concentrations of mercury, both due to proximity to mining and the presence of intact old growth forests. So let's just look at this all holistically, looking at the forested area and the deforested area at Los Amigos Biological Station. And what we see in that deforested area is that rates of input of mercury are extremely low. These concentrations of mercury entering at Los Amigos Biological Station in the deforested area are similar to what we're seeing in all the other mining sites, both in those other mining sites in the deforested areas and those secondary growth forests. The difference occurs in this forested area at Los Amigos, which has the intact primary growth forest, where we're seeing rates of inputs that are among the highest ever reported around the globe. These annual inputs of mercury in the forested area are 15 times higher than what we're seeing in the deforested areas. Not only that, we're seeing that this mercury is also being stored within the soils. And we think that this would not just be isolated to Los Amigos Biological Station or just to the Peruvian Amazon, but to any site that has primary, intact, old growth forests located directly next to artisanal and small-scale gold mining. And so the next step was to determine whether this mercury that's entering into the terrestrial ecosystem could be entering the food web, posing a risk for all the organisms that live in these forests. And so we examined mercury from birds in order to determine whether mercury was entering into the terrestrial food web. We collected bird feathers from 3 different species of birds, 2 insectivores and 1 frugivore, from both Los Amigos, which is located near mining, and Cochacashu, which is a biological station far remote from artisanal and small-scale gold mining, and compared the concentration of mercury for all 3 of these birds. We also compared the concentration of mercury to the EC10, EC20, and EC30, which represent the effective concentrations at which reproductive success is reduced by 10%, 20%, or 30%. Found was that Los Amigos, the concentrations of mercury in all 3 species of birds that we measured were 2 to 12 times higher than what we're seeing at Cochacashu. Not only that, no birds at Cochacashu exceeded the EC10 line, the point at which reproductive success is reduced by 10%, whereas several individuals from one species of insectivore at Los Amigos exceeded EC10, EC20, and EC30, thereby suggesting that these birds are having reduced reproductive success. And these species of birds that we looked at are fairly low in the food web. We would expect to see even higher impairment in higher trophic level species, whether that be birds, mammals, or reptiles. And so this suggests that yes, we do need to be concerned about terrestrial organisms living in forest ecosystems. But not only that, we also need to be thinking about how landscape change is influencing the fate of mercury in these systems. We know that gold mining alters the landscape. Here you can see Landsat imagery from 1987 from 2 watersheds that currently have high amounts of mining. And they're a bit blurry with large pixel size because it's an old image, but you can clearly see that it's completely forested. Now compare that with imagery from 2020, where you can see that ponding now takes over the entire landscape. There's been an increase in 670% of ponds across this landscape. Now, aquatic ecosystems are hotspots for the production of methylmercury, with methylmercury being the form of mercury that can bioaccumulate and is toxic to organisms. And so therefore, if we're seeing a proliferation of ponds across the landscape replacing these forests, we could then see the release of mercury that's currently being stored in these forests entering into these nearby aquatic environments, where methylmercury is being formed at a rate of about 10 times what we see in forests. And therefore, methylmercury production would be much greater and pose an even greater risk to organisms in these aquatic ecosystems, and as well as to indigenous communities relying on fish from these ecosystems. And so all of this suggests that it's really important to continue to protect intact forests located near artisanal and small-scale gold mining, since deforestation leads to the release of mercury into aquatic environments, which are even more prone to mercury accumulation in the food web. And it's also important that we reduce the emissions of mercury from artisanal and small-scale gold mining, because terrestrial ecosystems are also at risk of mercury pollution to organisms, as I showed you in songbirds. And finally, we expect that these results are not just isolated to the Peruvian Amazon, but occur in any intact old-growth primary forests located near to artisanal and small-scale gold mining throughout the world. And therefore, we really need to put more efforts into conserving these forests because of the important ecosystem services that they provide. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Excellent presentation, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion. We're already seeing questions coming up on the list, and I'll remind folks that we'll hold the questions until our Q&A session, where we'll address as many as we can. So next up, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Matthew Feiner from Amazon Conservation. For the last 2 years, Dr. Feiner has been dedicated to investigating threats to the Amazon, particularly in the very dynamic field of real-time satellite-based deforestation monitoring. Matt directs Amazon Conservation's MAP project, the organization's dedicated real-time monitoring program, which has published over 150 high-impact public reports on critical topics, including wildfires, illegal gold mining, illegal logging, expansion of the agricultural frontier, and road construction across the Amazon basin. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks, Luis. Okay, so I'm going to continue the focus on the Amazon. Next slide, please. So here's our evolving base map of the major gold mining deforestation fronts that we are tracking, indicated in yellow. Next slide, please. I'm going to focus on the red arrows, southern Peru. Again, continuing the focus of the previous two on southern Peru, and also I'm going to show off our latest work in Venezuela. Honorable mentions to the gold mining sites indicated in green. The indigenous territories of the Brazilian Amazon are also quite severe at the moment, but I won't have time to address those at the moment. Next slide, please. All right, so starting first Continue our focus on the southern Peruvian Amazon down there in Madre Dios. Next slide, please. So this is the area that Luis was going to show us. This is an area known as La Pampa, which really reached crisis levels of gold mining deforestation a couple years ago, particularly between 2017 and 2019. Here you can see with that red dot as a reference point, the rapid deforestation of over 1,000 hectares, 3,000 acres in those 2 years between 2017 and 2019. And I often made the analogy of a hungry caterpillar that was basically just devouring primary rainforest to the east every year as it kept expanding. Next slide, please. And so at MOP, as Luis mentioned, we specialize in satellite-based real-time monitoring. And so we were part of that drumbeat of information warning about this unfolding crisis. These are 2 reports that we put out in 2017 and 2018, respectively, really just documenting this caterpillar really just devouring the primary forests of La Pampa. Next slide, please. And then in early 2019, interestingly, in January 2019, we just so happened to put out this report really calling out that the deforestation had reached record levels in the southern Peruvian Amazon, and in particular, this area of La Pampa. Next slide, please. And then it just so happened that the very next month, February 2019, the Peruvian government launched Operation Mercury, which was really an unprecedented government crackdown on the illegal mining situation with a focus on La Pampa. Previous interventions were pretty hit and run. There would be an intervention and then the authorities would leave and then the miners would just come back. Whereas this was a full-on, long-term, multi-sectoral, various agencies involved to deal with the social impacts as well. Real targeted government crackdown on the crisis in La Pampa. Next slide, please. And the results were quite remarkable. I think it's one of the real underrated success stories in conservation and government action. So you can see that next year between 2019 and 2020, the gold mining deforestation just stopped, hard stop. Just that caterpillar just stopped. You can see that red reference dot for reference again, just full stopping of the eastward gold mining deforestation expansion in La Pampa. Next slide, please. Okay, so fast forward to now. This is the report, our latest report that we're actually getting ready to put out, hopefully in another week or 2. So be on the lookout for it, where we give the latest update on what exactly is happening in the southern Peruvian Amazon. Next slide, please. And we present this updated base map of, so this is the latest situation in the southern Peruvian Amazon. So for the background, the green is the protected areas, the gray is the buffer zones, and the purple are indigenous territories. And the active layer is the yellow and red. The yellow is the gold mining deforestation pre-Operation Mercury, 2017, 2018. And the red is the gold mining deforestation post-Operation Mercury. So really looking at that 2-3 years, pre-Operation Mercury versus post-Operation Mercury. Next slide, please. So we zoom in on a couple key areas. You can see the letter A in the middle of the map there. That's La Pampa. And also in that inset in the upper left there, again, you can see it's all yellow. It's just all the gold, that hard stop, the gold mining deforestation in 2017 and 18, and then just Operation Mercury just stopped it. And that continues to this day. So that's the good news. The bad news is we have detected leakage of gold mining stopping in La Pampa, but emerging in other areas. One of the real poster childs for this leakage is an area known as Periamanu, indicated by the letter C on the base map. And in the zoom image, you can see it's a couple specks of yellow, but really that all red, which means major escalation of the gold mining deforestation in that area post Operation Mercury. Next slide, please. So this is just reviewing what I just said. The gold mining stopped in La Pampa, the good news, but then the bad news is you do have these various leakage zones. Next slide, please. Another major leakage area indicated by letter F. We have noted in about 3 or 4 indigenous communities, also major leakage areas. For example, this area in the native community of Barranco Chico, you can see a little bit of yellow, but mostly red, meaning that major escalation of gold mining deforestation post Operation Mercury. On the good side is the government really has expanded Operation Mercury and targeted some of these areas. So there have been subsequent raids in Periamanu. And literally just last week, the government had an intervention in Barranco Chico. Next slide, please. So speaking of these government interventions, another real advance or capability that I wanted to highlight is using very high resolution satellites. So we were able to use the moderate resolution and the high resolution imagery to track the gold mining deforestation footprint. But with a new line of very high resolution satellites, 50 centimeters from Planet, we're able to zoom in even more and actually pick up the actual mining equipment indicated here in red and mining camps highlighted in yellow. So this is a zoom in of the Periamanu region. And so basically what we're able to do is not only show the gold mining footprint, but actually give authorities exact locations on mining equipment and camps. So this is Periamanu. Next slide, please. And this is Barranco Chico. So this is actually information that we provided the Peruvian government prior to their recent intervention, showing the exact location of mining equipment and mining camps. So a major advance. Next slide, please. So the upcoming findings of this report that we're going to be putting out soon is overall there has been a major decrease in gold mining deforestation, about 62% overall. So even with these leakage areas, overall the gold mining deforestation has decreased, mostly because of this remarkable decrease in La Pampa, about 95% reduction in the gold mining in La Pampa. However, that's the good news scenario. The bad news scenario is we have been seeing these leakage areas such as Periamanu and indigenous territories with this dramatic 100% increase. Next slide, please. So with the remaining time, I'll do this quickly if I am running out of time. I wanted to quickly show our latest work in Venezuela, indicated by the red arrow. Next slide, please. So this is an area in Yapacana National Park, really in the heart of the Venezuelan Amazon. So this is what the gold mining footprint looks like that we can see in moderate and high resolution imagery. But I really want to emphasize again this latest advance with tasking very high resolution SkySat imagery. Next slide, please. We're able to take that mining footprint and go deeper and produce stuff like this, which is a detailed map of actually all the logging camps and equipment, which really provides another level of, so in addition to documenting the expansion of gold mining deforestation, really providing this actionable information of camps and heavy mining equipment, as Luis was indicating, the different types of mining equipment, which is really very, the critical information needed for interventions. And then the final image, we're just going to zoom in on that inbox A. So again, this is showing off that 50 centimeter resolution capability of SkySat. Next slide, please. And this is the data, our data added onto it, where we identify all the individual camps and mining equipment, and then can make that information available for governments, for example, to really aid in government interventions. And the last slide, I just wanted to emphasize that I do use my Twitter account to do some of the more real time. We do these periodic reports in MOP, but I really use my Twitter account to do these more real time updates on the current gold mining deforestation situation in Peru, Brazil, Venezuela, also documenting some new emerging fronts in Ecuador and Bolivia. So feel free to check out me on that's my Twitter tag there. And that's all. Hope I stayed somewhat in time.
That's great. Thank you very much, Matt. And just bring it back up to the stage, Jackie Gerson as well, where we'll start our Q&A session. And we have a few questions. So we'll start off with one question from, let's see what we have here. There's a question from Joseph Boat. So excuse me if I'm pronouncing anybody's name incorrectly. So are cyanide treatment processes used in the Amazon? I can say a couple words about that and then open it to the rest of the speakers. We've seen some cyanide treatment. So in Brazil, we've seen the cyanidization of mercury-treated tailings. So it's a secondary processing, not primary processing, at least at the ASGM level. So there is tailings that are then trucked to secondary facilities, which are either at larger or medium scales or even household scales, treated with cyanide for extraction of remaining gold. These are areas where there is usually one or two rounds of processing using mercury amalgamation. And of course, the recovery from mercury amalgamation is relatively low compared to cyanide. We've also seen this in areas adjacent to the Amazon. So this would be like high altitude Andean areas like La Rinconada, where you have treatment using mercury at very high altitude sites, and then they're trucked down to lower elevation sites in cities in the Piedmont areas adjacent to the Amazon, where they're then post-treated with cyanide, usually at the household level, and in some cases kind of small to mid-level. And some of that activity happens in Amazon context as well. That, of course, the liquor from those treatments are then put into waterways. In Peru, the most famous case is Lake Titicaca, but in the Amazon, they'll generally be put into streams and adjacent lakes. I'm not sure if we had any other comments or responses on that question. No? Okay, so we have another question from Malgorzata Stylo. So this is for Jackie. Is there a global or regional study that would provide an overview of the scale of problem, mapping the co-occurrence of ASGM with mercury inside or in the vicinity of primary forests?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And unfortunately, at the moment, there is no study of that sort, which I think is really important to have. What we do know is that the majority of artisanal and small-scale gold mining sites globally do use mercury in the processing of gold, and that there are many other locations outside of just the Amazon where this primary old-growth forest is located directly next to mining activity. But unfortunately, we have no quantification of that beyond just saying that it's not just isolated to Peru. So yes, that is a really great question and something that I would love to find out more in the future.
Great, thank you. This one's a question for me. So it says, can you elaborate more on the point that these forest impacts can undermine mitigation efforts to restore and rehabilitate? Well, yes. I mean, and the question is like, there's a question of whether Cynthia has done, what has Cynthia done to support rehabilitation methodology for forests? In terms of the impacts, because of the profound soil disturbances, which basically strip carbon, micronutrients, microorganisms, and disrupts the soil structure, the problem for reforestation or restoration, if that's even at all possible, and it's an area of active research, is that you don't have soils. So much of the work needs to stabilize soils, restore some level of carbon to the area, because mainly it's quartz sand. So, for example, at Cynthia, over a 5-year study, we analyzed how to use 71 different species of native Amazonian trees for restoring areas in La Pampa. And La Pampa is the areas that we've all been discussing, which essentially is converting forests to deserts. So it's mainly sand. So to be able to do that, we use biochar, which has been treated with microorganisms and liquid organic fertilizers to provide a matrix in which forest saplings can be transplanted. So it's not just what tree species you use, but it's also the way that you raise them so they're sturdy enough that in combination with the use of biochar that's treated with these amendments, they have a chance, because you basically have one chance to plant them and leave them, because you're not going to be going back, especially if you're trying to reforest 100,000 hectares or other areas, which are very remote and very expensive to go back. So we've been doing a lot as well, taking a look at terraforming using large heavy equipment like bulldozers, the use of fast-growing species like bamboo, the use of natural regeneration as the major methodology, and basically having a very dedicated or strategic human interventions on accelerating the growth, the use of a ground cover to increase nitrogen in recovering soils, basically try to find out as many tools to recover these areas and accelerate their restoration. So that's something that we're doing, and many other groups are starting to do this, especially given that ASGM is growing at rapid speeds, as Matt has shown. And these are areas that represent among the most difficult places to restore in the Amazon compared to any other deforestation driver. Let's see, one more question I think we have for Matt. Let's see, this is from Ken Davis. Is it feasible to automate the identification of mining equipment, including dredges and camps, using pattern recognition, perhaps with machine learning?
Yeah, I think we've talked about this recently. I think it's like a poster child for possible machine learning. It's because we have been doing it all manually, but we have the training data, and yeah, I think it's the perfect project for machine learning, especially in really dense areas like we just showed in Yapacana. We were a little crazy to kind of do all that by hand. So yeah, it's got to go to AI soon. I think it's a perfect project that's hanging out there for sure.
Okay. And I can talk to this because actually my group is doing work. We have a dedicated team on remote sensing and machine learning. So we've actually started to publish papers. So we have a team which is a partnership between Wake Forest University, Cynthia, and Dartmouth University, funded by NASA, for developing algorithms using convoluted neural nets, transfer learning, and other machine learning methodologies, where we detect mining equipment. So we have the ability, using a combination of optical and radar, to to see those dredges, see those mining camps, see those mining hoses in some cases, and also the characterize the edges of mining ponds, which are actually in some cases difficult to detect, and also tailing piles in barren areas, something that we've termed dark mining, which is up to about 10% of mining areas, because they either occur in Amazon beaches during the dry season, or it represents remining in previously mined areas, because much of the way to detect it in the past has been looking at the loss of forest because of deforestation. But with advanced satellites and machine learning technologies, we can actually detect the mining in areas that are already barren. So we don't rely on forest to give us that proxy for mining activity, and we can quantify it. We can also use machine learning for seeing the changes in sedimentation in the mining ponds, which are many times the first indication that people are in those mining ponds again, sucking up sediments and remobilizing them. And that color difference is now being classified. And that was a paper that we published last month in remote sensing. So a lot of new applications. We hope to be combining it with the great work that folks like Matt Feiner are doing to speed up the delivery of information for the world to see and for folks to act on. So I see that we're coming to the end of our time. So I'd like to thank all the speakers for their excellent presentations and for participating in a dialogue. I'd like to remind everyone that for any questions we did not get to at the end of this section, they'll be collected, answered, and shared on the planetGOLD website following the end of our event. And I also do want to remind everyone that after about a 10-minute break, the program will resume at 11 a.m. Eastern Time with an event hosted by the World Bank Group's Climate Smart Mining Initiative. And this event will, again, provide an opportunity to discuss and advance the concept and practice of forest smart mining for the ASM sector. And we hope to see you there. So again, thank you to all our speakers, and thank you to all the participants in the session. We hope that you found this interesting and starts a dialogue, and we will see you the next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Luis.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this session on applying principles of free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC, in the artisanal and small-scale mining context. My name's Taylor Kennedy. I'm the Director of Organizational Impact at Resolve, and I'm currently the Acting Director of our Sustainable Resources Program. May I have the slides, please? Excellent, thank you. And you can go to the next one, please. Thanks. We've got two great presentations today, sharing insights and examples from the ground, and I'll introduce those speakers in just a few moments. But first, I wanted to give a bit of an overview for today's discussion. Free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC, is a principle that says that Indigenous communities have a right to give or to withhold consent to proposed projects that may affect them, whether that's impacts on their lands, their natural resources, their culture, and so on. This is a right that's recognized in international soft law, specifically for Indigenous peoples, in recognition of the historic injustices that Indigenous peoples have experienced as a result of colonization and dispossession of their lands. It's intended to be a safeguard for collective rights which have not always been respected, the right to self-determination and the free pursuit of development, as well as individual human rights. The right of FPIC is articulated in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's also in the International Labor Organization's Convention 169, in the Equator Principles, and in a number of voluntary policies. It's also in some local laws. And part of why it's on our agenda today is because planetGOLD's project requirements include a stipulation that any project on or near or affecting Indigenous peoples must secure FPIC. Next slide, please. Thank you. FPIC is often confused or muddled with other concepts and language that relate to community engagement. It's not free, prior, and informed consent if all you do is consult with a community or engage with a community, or if they're not currently protesting, so you assume that the community is on board. Even if there is some compensation and benefit to communities, that is not the same as FPIC. However, implementing FPIC almost always includes these things. It includes consultation, it includes engagement, it includes grievance mechanisms and compensation as part of the work to build a trusting and respectful relationship that can enable consent. Next slide, please. Thanks. The F, P, and the I, and the C in FPIC can be unpacked a little bit more to help us understand the concept more fully. So free means that any decision by a community is made free from coercion or manipulation, whether that's pressure from the local government or by an elite member of the community who wants to benefit from a project or by a company. Prior means that consent needs to be received before the activity or project commences. Informed means that communities need to receive all of the information they need. That information needs to be trustworthy, it needs to be accessible, and they need time and sometimes expert guidance in order to process it. And of course, consent means that a community must be able to say yes, and they must be able to say no as well. So 2 other quick points. FPIC is a process, and it's the development of a relationship and agreements that must be maintained and honored throughout the life of a project. It's not just a one-time decision. Next slide, please. And just to elaborate on this last point, that FPIC isn't a one-time decision, informed consent needs to be received at several stages in the life of a project. This graphic was developed for large-scale mining, but is generally applicable for ASM. Consent should be received before exploration, before permitting, before a project begins, before major changes to a project, and before the project concludes to agree on what closure should look like. Next slide, please. So that's it in terms of a short overview for this session, but we'll just take a moment now to pull up our next presentation, where we'll hear from Sarah Aviado, the National Project Manager of planetGOLD Philippines. Sarah will present some lessons learned from work to attain FPIC in Sagada, Philippines. After Sarah's presentation, we'll hear from Johannes Abali from Alliance for Responsible Mining about work to phase out mercury at a project in Suriname. I'll share a couple quick reflections after Johannes presents, and then we'll turn to your questions. So please feel free to put those in the Q&A at any time. Sarah's presentation is pre-recorded to avoid connectivity issues, but Sarah is here with us and will be available to answer questions near the end of the session. So please go ahead and start Sarah's presentation.
Good day. I am Sara Maripante Aviado, the National Project Manager of planetGOLD Philippines, and I will present lessons learned on working to attain free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC, in Sagada, Philippines. Sagada Mountain Province is one of the 2 project sites of planetGOLD Philippines. Based on the contextual study done by the project, small-scale mining plays an essential role in poverty reduction and rural development. The results of the key informant interviews show that small-scale mining in Sagada started in Barangay Fedelisan in the 1970s. The barangay officials and elders opposed the idea of mining in their community because of the fear that it would destroy the environment. However, in the 1980s, the miners got their support because of the potential economic opportunities for the residents. The barangay officials of the 6 communities in the northern Sagada met and agreed to open the area for small-scale mining. The legal basis for FPIC are the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, or IPRA law, People's Small-Scale Mining Act of 1991, and Executive Order Number 79. FPIC is defined by IPRA law as the consensus of all members of the indigenous cultural communities or indigenous peoples to be determined in accordance with their respective customary laws and practices, free from any external manipulation, interference, and coercion, and obtained after fully disclosing the intent and scope of the activity in a language and process understandable to the community. The IPRA, in theory, gives IPs in the Philippines the right to stop or suspend projects that do not satisfy the consultation process required by the law. Sagada Project has complied with the FPIC process in order to secure a small-scale mining contract and is mining legally in government-declared People's Small-Scale Mining Areas, or locally known as Minahang Bayan. However, the planetGOLD may be required to undergo another FPIC process. It can only be regarded as covered by the same FPIC for the small-scale mining contract if two conditions are met. Number one, local miners association must be the proponents or owners of the MFPS, and they must request from the planetGOLD all project components through a letter of community resolution. And in response, number two, planetGOLD must grant in writing the request of the Miners Association. These were complied with. So, based on the documentary requirements, the project may proceed without the need for a full-blown FPIC. Since it is stated in planetGOLD Criteria B, respect rights and lives of the indigenous peoples, planetGOLD Philippines planned to gain social acceptability of the project by conducting community consultations in Sagada from February to March 2022 with both the host and neighboring communities. Just a disclaimer that this is still a work in progress and have not yet reached its finality. Concerned communities identified are 6 barangays in northern Sagada, or primary impact areas, and 4 barangays in eastern part of the municipality, which are the downstream communities. During the 3 community consultation sessions, an overview of the project was provided, highlighting its 4 components: formalization, access to finance and markets, better technology, and communications. The presentations also included the current small-scale mining situation in Sagada, the proposed Mercury-free processing system, or MFPS, for the improvement of gold recovery and income, as well as the plan to build a tailings storage facility, or TSF. The Mining Association, as the intended beneficiary of the MFPS, also provided a statement of support for the project, including how this would help in the development of the small-scale mining sector. The meeting highlights include mineral processing technology used and environmental impacts. The potential impacts of cyanide and glycine, particularly on people, agriculture, and the river passing through the lower eastern communities, river water quality monitoring, and accuracy and integrity of water testing or sampling to be conducted are discussed. Economic concerns, members of the community asked about the potential income-generating activities for the miners and community members, as well as the possible effects of MFPS installation to current livelihood of both miners and non-miners. Also discussed was ownership of the MFPS, or Mercury-free processing system. The project team noted that ownership of the processing facility will be transferred to the Miners Association upon compliance with the provisions of the Memorandum of Agreement and project requirements. The community members of upstream primary impact mining villages expressed their support for the project. As to the downstream non-mining eastern barangays, mostly the comments were related to the elders' strong disapproval of the construction of MFPS in Fidelisan because of their unfavorable experience in the past with a cyanide facility, which ended up with an agreement among all the barangays that chemical use in small-scale mining shall be prohibited. As to the ways forward and agreements after the third consultation, the following are the action plans and agreements from the community leaders of northern communities and the Miners Association. One, the Barangay Council of the 6 communities agreed to submit a barangay resolution to the Municipal Council of Sagada, requesting for the implementation of planetGOLD project activities and the endorsement of the small-scale mining activities for livelihood purposes in Minahang Bayan. The Miners Association shall submit a resolution to the Municipal Council of Sagada approving the partnership with AGC and the implementation of planetGOLD activities for livelihood purposes in Minahang Bayan. And a written agreement or MOA can be drafted. For the lessons learned, number 1, language can be a big barrier. We had to find and ask a technical person from the government to present during the succeeding community consultations who can speak Sagada local language, such as Kankanae. Number 2, always listen to the community. The elders are opposing the project because of their past experience of the negative impact of cyanide in the water body. Recognizing the main problem will help you find proper solutions. Number 3, the technology developed should address not just economic benefits of the miners, but also the environmental concerns of the impact areas who may be non-miners. And we are glad that this is exactly what is being offered by the project. Number 4, find a solution that worked. The community originally opposed small-scale mining in the 1970s, but finally consented in the 1980s. Recently, when the Miners Association went through the FPIC process, the Eastern barangays also opposed because of the previous bad experience on cyanide. But the endorsement from the municipal government resolved the issue. So this is also the solution adopted by the Miners Association for this current project. Number 5, social acceptability is more than complying with all the legal documents. The project must be received and welcomed by the community genuinely. This is the key not just to start the project, but to sustain it even after the project life. After all, FPIC is about attaining the intent of the law more than the letter of the law, which is to respect the lives and rights of the indigenous peoples. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Sarah. As I mentioned, we're really looking forward to questions and discussion with the audience, so please do go ahead and put any questions you may have in the chat. In the meantime, I'd like to turn it over to Johannes Abili, if we can pull up his presentation, to please share with us some of Alliance for Responsible Mining's work in Suriname. Over to
Thank you, Taylor. Like announced before, my name is Johannes Abili, and I am the project coordinator for the Mercury Phase Out project in Suriname that is currently being executed by ARM, which stands for Alliance for Responsible Mining. Basically, we are a international renowned organization that focuses on improving the principles that the small scale miners use in order to make the operations more sustainable, more viable, and also to try and help them to move from an informal status to a more formal status, and thereby also minimizing the impacts on the social and the physical environment. With regards to small scale mining, FPIC have been applied in Suriname for quite some time. However, it is not something that is required by law in Suriname. It's a principle that is being used by many larger companies, and they do this based on other standards that they have been committed to. ARM is an organization based on French law, but we have subsidiaries in Burkina Faso, in Peru, and like I said before, also in France. And we focus on small scale mining. Next. With regards to the engagement that we do, because for all our activities, we do prior engagement. In Suriname, small scale mining takes place in the hinterlands of the country, so in the interior. And this is an area of the country that is populated by a group known as the Maroons, and these are descendants of the slaves that ran away back in during slavery time, and they made settlements and villages where they live within their own tradition and also within their own leadership system. So this is especially challenging for the government to engage with them because they have other principles that than we know of within the Western world. One of the things that we do is we provide clarity with regards to the topic that we want to bring to their attention. Another thing is that we communicate the objective of their engagement. So we clearly let them know what do we expect and what type of feedback are we looking forward to get from them. First of all, you have to respect the traditional conducts. In Suriname, for example, you have to speak to the captain because the captain is the leader, the traditional leader of the village. You have to speak to the captain through his assistant, which is called the basha. And this is also a method of showing respect to their way of engagement. If you would have used the normal Western way of communication, it is quite possible that they get lost in the interaction and therefore diminishing their level of engagement. Another thing is that when a delegation is mandated to go and engage with communities, with small scale miners, the delegation should be in the position to give them enough time to hold feedback with the rest of the community. What often happens is that they go to the village and they talk to a small group and they leave, and then assuming that they have consulted the village. But the proper way to do that is to explicitly solicit the participation of a wider group within the community. Otherwise, you may end up with a situation where your engagement has been based on contact with just a small group of people. You have to take into account the traditions within the community, the way they live. In Suriname, the people go to their plots in morning time. So often, if company want to bypass the majority of the villagers, they go in the morning when they know that most of the people are not home, and then they just see a few people, and that makes it much easier for them to manage the discussion and to manipulate their way through some form of consent. Next. Another thing to take into consideration is that not all rights have found their way into the active law of the countries where FPIC has to be applied. So FPIC, it is a right. Suriname is part of ILO Convention 169 that indicates that we need to respect the tribal people and also respect their way of living. But many of the requirements in order to give feet and hand to this principle are not taken into the active law. So this creates some space, especially for companies, to manipulate and to get their intents without actually respecting the view of the communities. Clearly, here we see that there is a battle between the rights holder and the shareholders. The thing is that the shareholders, in many ways, often are much more powerful in terms of capital, in terms of resources, but also in terms of network and access to media, equipment, and all that kind of stuff. Also, knowledge. In the communication process, the initiator of the communication, of the engagement, should not monopolize the interaction. You have to be aware that often there is a great deal of difference between the technical knowledge of the engaging community and the company or the government. So that should never, that gap in information should never be exploited. So another thing is that within that framework, companies have to have a policy for themselves, which they use to engage communities for specific activities. And these are activities that presumably can have an impact on the day-to-day lives of the community members. It doesn't even have to have an impact, but if there is a likelihood that there will be an impact, these communities should be consulted, and they should also give their consent for this type of activity to be executed. Next. So in terms of the application of FPIC in Suriname, the challenging part, what we've experienced in Suriname, is the I, informed. The I is being interpreted as just providing the dry knowledge, telling people, for example, we're going to build a dam from here to there. But the thing is that if you are not an engineer or you don't have some engineering knowledge, communities often do not know what will be the factual consequences of the construction of a dam in a certain area. So they will only know this after the dam has been constructed. So the companies and the government that really don't want this engagement, because often these are large projects and they don't want to, don't want to have external parties intervene within the planning because they don't know how it will impact the planning, and often comments, actions that they will have to take based on the comments have not been budgeted for. So they really basically want to check the box of engagement and go on with the project like it was planned. So it is really important to make sure that communities are connected with a source that can provide them enough information about the topic at hand. If I would have to take a decision about producing honey from bee, the quality would be quite low because I don't know anything about harvesting honey from bees. So this is the situation that community finds themselves in often. And in Suriname, like I said before, the relevant community when it regards to large-scale mining and other large-scale projects within the interior regards the maroon communities. And this is a group that, for several social and economical reasons, have been left behind in the development of Suriname. So there are just a few members of the community that have specific rights on the topic that are being discussed with them. So there's a big cut in the part of the eye. The other part is the consent. It's The companies blow it wide open for interpretation. You engage them, but what if they don't agree? What is the legal consequence if the community say we don't agree? So the thing that happens is that often the communities are being gathered. They do a meeting, and the community, they present their ideas, but the project continue as follows, as there are no harshly stipulated actions that should follow after communities don't give their consent. So these are things that we need to take into consideration when evaluating the application of the principles in FPIC. So that was it for me. I hope it was clear for everybody. I thank everybody for their attention. And if possible, we can move to the question section. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Johannes. And a reminder too to participants that you may add questions that you might have in the Q&A. We do have a few questions already, and the first one I'd actually like to pose to both Johannes and to Sarah, perhaps starting with you, Johannes. You mentioned the importance of explicitly seeking participation of a wider group within the community, even when you're speaking with a leaders. And you also pointed to the importance of intersectionality. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. So I wonder if you could just share a little bit about how you think about that, how you encourage it, and especially in places where men might be visible leads of the community. How do you encourage women's participation? And then Sarah, I'd love to hear that from you after we hear from Johannes.
Okay, so this is basically a tool to bypass the monopolization of the decision, because the companies often they find a way to mobilize the leadership or focal points within the community to get them at their side. So if you would get a broader range of participants within the decision-making process, you would be able to, at least for a great part, bypass, let's say, the corruption. And this is you can do this by explicitly telling the focal point that you're negotiating with that you want the explicit how you call it expression of the opinion of the rest of the community. It may not be everybody, but a wider group than the leadership themselves.
Thank you very much, Johannes. Sarah, same question for you. How did you integrate gender considerations and other kind of intersectionality in the work that you all did?
For gender, we also had separate activities for women, like advocacy training for women, and then we also had um, sorry, advocacy training for women and gender sensitivity for minors, both men and women. Also, during the consultations, we also made sure that women are included in the consultations, and we also asked them during the open forum what they think about the project.
Thank you very much. We have another question for Sarah. Was it challenging to engage the barangay citizens and the councils? How did you overcome the disapprovements of the elders? You had mentioned that the elders were concerned about the cyanide from prior experiences. So maybe you can tell us more about that and the kinds of discussions that helped them to finally come around to the resolution that you mentioned.
Yeah, that's true. It's more difficult to convince the elders because of their previous negative experience. But with the help of the community, they are giving us tips on how to face the challenges. Also, we have gained the support of the mining barangays, as well as the barangay councils or the elected officials, as well as the community or the mining community. So they are the ones um, telling or giving the support. They are giving statements of support, and they are also the ones who are coaching us, or they took the next steps, like they prepared resolutions to the municipal council, and these elders also listened to the municipal council, and they also told us that we need to talk to village professionals or technical persons, because these village professionals will talk to the elders. So it's very helpful that the community is also giving us support on this, on convincing the elders, especially.
Thank you. Sarah, one more question for you has come in. What are the foreseen direct or indirect impacts, whether positive or negative, to the nearby non-mining barangays should the facilities be successfully built in the selected area?
Um, Actually, for the negative impacts, the our technical persons are very keen on this. So we are strictly following the environmental standards set by the government, and the measures showed that um, the if ever there will be an impact, like the water, it will be treated before it's released, so it will never reach the neighboring but far non-mining barangays. Um, Also, the impact as to economic impact, it will benefit them, not just the mining barangays. So, as to social, that's the reason why we want to have um, support from all the barangays, whether mining or non-mining, because after all, they belong to one tribe or one community. So it's not just we are not just after the economic or environmental impacts, but more importantly, the social impact of the project. So there are benefits, as well as some foreseen negative environmental impacts, which may be mitigated and prevented.
Thank you. Now we have a question for both of you. Perhaps I'll go to Johannes first. So the comment is, it's truly great to hear stories from the field from both of you. And then the question is, what would be your advice to the other Planet Gold projects in other countries on this topic, to make sure that the initiatives are responsible and truly supporting FPIC? What could be done better?
If I may start, a general thing that always helps is to push for formalization. Make sure that these principles are adopted by the government or government authorities that are relevant to the activities that are being conducted. That is the first thing. The other things is that to make people aware, people that are being subjected to these large scale activities. And the other thing is be mindful of the tricks. Be mindful of the tricks that they use. They use standard tricks, and if you know where they use the tricks and in what part of the process, people are generally more aware, and you can mitigate the tricks that they use.
Just a quick follow-up on that, Johannes. Could you give an example of the kind of tricks that you have seen before, one or two?
Well, one of them is the gap in knowledge, specific knowledge about what will be done. If they're going to build a dam, what they say is, well, this thing will not impact you because it's so far from you guys and this and that. So one thing you could do is to request for independent advice to the communities that eventually financed by them, but that also may cause some trouble, but to seek independent knowledge so that the I in IFPEC can better comfort, So this is one thing. And the other thing is mobilization. Often they have a group, they have groups in the village that have uh, ties with the company if they have been there for a while. And what they could do is make sure that their people are present, so when there is not enough mobilization for the rest, you could have a room with 20 people, but just the people that support them. And then they can get an approval from that group, whilst that is not a representative group of the community. So these are some of the tricks. These are some of the tricks that they use, and it's good to be mindful of that. So a wide mobilization can help to diffuse that.
Thank you. Sarah, what would be your advice to other projects, on other Planet Gold projects or other projects that are seeking FPIC from communities?
My advice is connect with the people, listen to them. After all, the project is for the people, for their empowerment, for their welfare. And I believe that FPIC, like what I've said, is not just to start a project, but to sustain it even after the project life. So genuine acceptance of the project is very crucial. So have a genuine consent and acceptance of the project.
Thank you. This next question, I'm hoping that you will understand, Sarah. So have the FPIC discussions explained to the community that miners in Sagada who are members of the community are exporting their tailings to be treated with cyanide outside of the community boundaries? Is there an ethical issue in doing so, or is it reasonable for one community to reject a technology for their community, but continue to utilize that technology in another community? So I guess it's an opinion question, but hopefully that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Actually, that's a reality in the ground. Um, the miners are they are explaining it to their non-mining neighbors that they're losing a lot because the miners are bringing the tailings to another municipality, and they are spending more because they have to transport the ores and process it to another municipality. But if they will have the same or a more environment friendly processing facility in their own municipality, then they do not have to transport the ores, and the income will be within their municipality. So actually, if the non-mining barangays will just be open on the possibility of more economic impact, or not just in the mining barangays, but in the municipality as a whole, this is a good example of bringing the income inside their municipality, and not another municipality is benefiting from the processing.
Thank you. We have just it looks like a gap in the question. So I had a few reflections to share, and then I'd love to hear from Johannes and from Sarah if there's anything sort of coming to mind from this discussion. And then I have a few announcements before we wrap up. But just a couple of quick thoughts. First, I think it's worth acknowledging that large scale mining hasn't figured this out at all. And, artisanal miners are clearly coming from a different place with significantly fewer resources. And our objective with this conversation is certainly not to suggest that artisanal miners should be held to a higher standard than large scale mining. But at the same time, there are a number of reasons that FPIC and related concepts should be on our collective radar, and reasons to be thinking about how to do this better within the artisanal space. We heard from speakers about some of the benefits that can accrue, and just the value of having social acceptance, of course. From a moral perspective too, many of those who are here today, who are working with artisanal miners, are doing so out of recognition of the systemic disadvantages that many of them face, as well as out of concern for human rights, broadly speaking, including issues of equitable social and economic development, environmental justice, gender equity, labor rights, and more. We spoke about how UNDRIP articulated the right of FPIC in recognition of historical injustices experienced by Indigenous peoples. And so recognizing the right of Indigenous peoples to say yes or no is an extension of that support for human rights that we're collectively trying to uphold and collectively solving for. And even though mining may have begun before the NGO arrives to help improve this situation, and even though the interventions may be well-intended and impactful, NGOs certainly need to recognize that when their projects take place on Indigenous lands, that their work should be considered a project that needs consent from a community. And then from sort of a pragmatic perspective, I think as we push for formalization, we should expect that artisanal miners will increasingly be held to similar standards and principles as large-scale mining. For instance, in order to receive a concession, cooperatives may be asked to conduct an environmental and social impact assessment, make plans for mitigation and compensation and remediation of impacts to environmental, cultural heritage sites, and more. There are already some examples of that, and we need to start thinking about how to build that capacity. Also, moving away from simple transactional agreements with a single leader or leadership group of the community and moving towards broader engagement can bring a lot of additional opportunities for the impact that all of those around the table are seeking. Broader engagement can solve for some of the issues of elite capture that we see in many situations, including within some cooperatives. Insisting on engagement with broad swaths of the community can elucidate information of inequitable impacts from mining that might need to be solved for, whether women are experiencing it more than others because of, for instance, if the women's responsibility is to go collect water, and this is, displacing their access to water, that would be the sort of thing that, broader engagement would help to elucidate. And then it also helps to sort of crowdsource ideas from the community about how things could be done more efficiently or better, or linked to other projects that can have impact. Early and active engagement with communities provides an opportunity to avoid conflict or transform it. Many of you are involved in setting up comités de suivi, or local stakeholder groups that provide some oversight and conflict resolution. They're certainly a great resource, but there's also value in thinking about how artisanal miners can anticipate potential questions and conflicts through more active information sharing, or offering an additional point of entry for resolving complaints before they need to be taken before a full committee. And then finally, proactive engagement with communities can also provide opportunities for complementary impact or partnerships, like collective visioning of land and articulation of community development objectives. And a community with a stake in a project can also provide some protection and allyship as well. So yeah, just a few final thoughts from me. I'll turn to Johannes and then to Sarah, and then we'll wrap up with just a couple of quick announcements. Johannes?
Yes, thank you. Some great comments. The use of FPIC is impact based. So the fact that it's being used is to help to engage the communities in the process of dealing with the impacts, and it's just based on law. They have the right to know what is going to happen in their area, how it will impact them, and have a saying in that. And if we look at large scale mining, in terms of the impact, they do have an impact as a collective. But the thing is that most of the small scale mining in Suriname take place around or close to the community. So these are members of the communities themselves. So if there would be some standards where we would hold them accountable to do something like that, there would need to be significant increase in capacity and financial capacity, but also their work structure, and technical capacities in order to be able to do that. Because even the large scale companies that have all the resources in the world, they don't do it in a proper way. But this is, I think, mostly due to business reasons. So yes, we should make sure that the communities are safe, especially the section of the community that are not benefiting from it. And in the Suriname case, these are the elderlies and the women, because mining is for 95% a man's world in Suriname. There are basically no women involved in mining, and the few women that are involved in mining are providing services, having small shops on the small scale mining site. So these are things that we should take into consideration in terms of the application of FPIC principles.
Thank you very much. Sarah, any closing comments from you?
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, everyone. I just want to share that FPIC is the operationalization of how we respect the lives and rights of the indigenous peoples. So it should be given much time and attention. Sure, it may delay, it may cause delay to the project at some point, but we want the welfare of the community. But the community has to realize it and has to recognize and accept it. They have to embrace the noble purpose of our project, and it's them who will decide for their lives. So thank you very much.
Thank you. couldn't have said it better. And thank you both very much for the time that you've taken to share your experiences with us. And certainly, really appreciate the attention from the audience as well and your wonderful questions. So just to wrap up, there are two quick announcements. First, I think actually we covered most questions, but for any that we didn't get to, they will be collected, answered, and shared on the planetGOLD website following the end of the event. And after a 10-minute break, 8 minutes, apologies, the program will resume again at 11 Eastern with an event hosted by the World Bank Group's Climate Smart Mining Initiative. This event will be on Stage A and will provide an opportunity to discuss and advance the concept and practice of forest smart mining for the artisanal sector. We'll see you then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.